So I'm going to open the school committee meeting tonight, Thursday, March 14. I just wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, I'd like to draw people's attention to the calendar, which is up, and point out that it shows both the schedules of our school committee meetings, the schedule of the parent forums that the superintendent has yet to do, the meetings that are scheduled for our strategic planning effort, and also the public hearings that are scheduled for the B-Space Committee. So people take a look at that in case you want to. We encourage you to come to any or all of those. And I will say again before we're finished tonight, also I want to remind people that the public hearing for our budget will be held a week from tonight. Right now it's scheduled to be located here, but based on whether we get a sense that there are going to be more people that might be accommodated here, we might move the venue. We just don't know yet, and we don't know whether we could find another venue, in fact. And finally, I don't know whether there are people here tonight who wish to make public comments on the budget itself. There will be 15 minutes allocated early on the docket for public comments. If it turns out that there are more people who want to make comments that we can fit in to the 15-minute session, since we have some other business that we have to attend to and some people who are coming to make a presentation, then at the end of the meeting, for any of those people who have not had an opportunity to make a public comment on the budget, particularly if they cannot come next week when the real public hearing will begin, I will permit additional public comment in order to enable everybody to say something. That being the case, we can move to administrative business, and if the committee is willing, I would take a motion in connection with the consent agenda. Thank you, Ms. Stone. Thank you. We have a second from Ms. Kershaw. Thank you very much. Are there any comments? All in favor? All opposed?
I have to abstain on the past record for February 28th. I wasn't here.
I think that's a reasonable suggestion,
I think so,
Ms. Chalupsky. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry.
Okay, and I've seen the vote for everybody else, and yes, please, Ms. Stone.
Mr. Chairman, I see on the consent agenda it includes the establishment of a new memorial scholarship from the Brookline High School class of 1972. I'm hoping that they will be acknowledged and thanked for that. Absolutely,
they would be acknowledged and thanked for that, and we have, and in fact, I have already initiated a letter that's going out, but for the record, we want to thank the Brookline High School class of 1972. They have a lovely scholarship that they have created, and for a high school senior, and we appreciate that very much. If there are no other comments, since we've had a vote, I would move to subcommittee reports. And Ms. Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Subcommittee met this Monday, and as is the case here during the budget season, we discussed the budget. Primarily the FY14 addendum superintendent's message, and I'll save the details of that for Dr. Lupini and Mr. Rowe, who will detail it later for us, but just to say that the conversation focused on the difficulty associated with this budget and all of us struggling with the reductions that are in this budget and many of the programs that we care about not being able to be fully realized or funded, and continued to discuss whether there were additional options around revenues that could be found or considered in order to address the shortfall for programs we care about. And I suspect there'll be additional conversation about that as well.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I will say that after those two presentations that you mentioned, I'm hoping that we will have a discussion amongst ourselves as to what impressions people have or what opinions they want to give. Oh. How do you like that? Now the question is, can I set it up correctly? I guess so.
You go on.
Oh, it's upside down. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Capital improvements, Ms. Chalupsky.
Yes, I'll do part of the report today, and Ms. Scott will do the second part. The Capital Subcommittee met on March 8th. Right, today's the 14th only. It feels like it's been a month since we met, but it was just a week ago. At that meeting, we once more discussed all sorts of issues with space. We had a small discussion about the concept school, B-Space, and the possibilities, which was then elaborated on at the B-Space meeting on Monday night. The other piece that we discussed and actually took a vote on was the modulars for Lawrence School. And the Capital Subcommittee actually voted unanimously to recommend to the school committee to approve up to 4 modulars for the Lawrence School, so that the building commission can go ahead with the architects, because they had structured the architects so that they would first do the feasibility, give us some numbers, give us some, if it was even feasible, for both Baker and Lawrence. At this point, we are only talking about Lawrence and moving forward with Lawrence. And as I mentioned, I think at the last meeting, now I'm sort of a little confused here, but no, I think we talked about it at the meeting about the costs and the benefits for this particular, these particular units. There's a possibility of being able to put up to 4 there, and I think that if we were to give a little bit of leeway to the building commission, that would be a good idea. Ms. Scotto has agreed to be sort of the point person on the modulars, and Ms. Stone will back her up. So I would like to put forth a motion to approve up to 4 modulars for the Lawrence School.
I have is that a second, Ms. Stone? Thank you very much. Is there any other comment that people would like to make? Yes, Ms. Kershaw?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Charlevsky, can you just outline for us what the engagement with the community will be relative to the
Absolutely, that's a very good question.
Transportation, the placement of them,
Right.
aesthetics,
And
the
I
timing
won't
for
do
when
it
they'd
ju-
be ready?
Okay, I won't do it justice, and all of this is really preliminary. There definitely will be a community meeting, and my hope is within the next 2 weeks or so, because if we want to have them available to us, we have to move on it much quicker than we might on other projects. And so I think Dr. Lupini is in the process of putting together a date for that meeting. I mean, it's, as you saw, all the meetings that Dr. Lupini has for the forums and stuff, it's hard to find a day or a time that's available, but it would certainly have to be in the evening, and everybody, both the Lawrence School parents community and the Greater Lawrence community.
Lawrence Neighborhood Association is now an organized entity.
Right, and actually, Ms. Stone was kind enough to put out an email to the Lawrence School Neighborhood Association informing them of what was happening, and that we would be getting back to them with the date on that. You asked something. Oh, what the architects had come up with initially was they had 3 different iterations: a two classroom edition of modulars, a 3 classroom edition of modulars, and a 4 classroom edition of modulars. The cost, I think, ranged from about 1.6 to 2.5 million, something in that range. Mr. Rowe is not here.
Mr. Lifsky, I believe Mr. Rowe said at our meeting that the 1.6 was for 4.
Was for 4, but he didn't include the soft costs
That's true.
associated with
That's
it.
true.
So that's why I'm sort of giving the upper number as probably closer to more realistic number. It would take up part of the parking lot, is where it is planned for right now. It would be attached to the school on the 4-unit one. And there would still be about 5 to 7 parking spaces, is my understanding. All of this, I mean, is sort of in flux in terms of what they find as they go further into the drawings and the drawings for the actual units. Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Scotto.
Tony Quigley at the meeting said that it would be unlikely if the modulars were ready before winter, and it could be as late as March.
Right, thank you. That was what I meant. Yeah, that was your question, and I knew I hadn't answered all your questions. And so that's why it's all the more important to get this off as soon as quick as possible, so that we may be able to use it sometime next year.
The objective is to get in there by December. That may be hopeful, but that's certainly the target, no later than, so that we don't have the disruption that we were anticipating in terms of space at Lawrence. And the other thing to say is that we haven't actually seen drawings. One of the things that we would be sharing with the community from the beginning is the drawings, so that we can work through with the neighbors what it's going to take to do the installation and what it'll mean in the long run.
Sorry, just one more comment.
Sure.
Which is just that, and I think this is implied in your comments, Ms. Stone, but just that we make sure that our engagement around the placement and the design and all of that is an engagement and not just an informing process, that if there are opportunities to hear from the community with their ideas.
Well, that's exactly why
And
we would start with
the placement of the kindergarten classes in the fall, wherever that is, that we have some opportunity to really communicate as clearly and effectively up front with the community about where they'll be and what it will mean for them to be off-site until the modulars are ready.
I'm not sure that that's necessarily.
I'm not sure I would link those two concepts.
Yeah, I was just trying to be efficient in my comments. So I don't go on and on, because we're here to hear about other things.
I mean, I think the important piece is that before the architects start moving any further on putting together feasibility and schematic design, that there be input from the community,
Right.
that the community understand what it will entail in terms of the construction and what it will look like. Those are sort of the basics of what, and that the school understand what they will be getting out of it too. So all those pieces are important. Any other questions?
Just that the community will also have an opportunity to provide input and suggestions
Yes,
as well, I think.
that's
Yeah.
that's what I was trying to say at this
Okay.
community meeting
No,
that we would be having.
I think that's what Ms. Kershaw was kind of interested in.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think we have
We need to vote.
We do. We have a motion, I believe, and we even have a second, I believe. So all those who are in favor, raise their hands. Those opposed? Looks like we have a deal. Thank you very much.
and Ms. Scotto will give the rest of the capital subcommittee report because she was at the building commission meeting on Tuesday.
Please, Ms. Scotto.
First of all, the Pierce Auditorium is on its way, or will be on its way soon. There's a pre-construction meeting on Friday. The work will be done over the summer, and the people involved are working with the school and the parents, so it looks as if that is in good shape at this point in time. Work still continues in a small way on Runkle. There's a variety of things that have to be done. We haven't heard from Mass Chips yet, and that's actually good because that gives us a little bit more breathing room. They are the people who certify the greenness of the building. There are some closeout documents that are still being done, but everything is moving along, and it shouldn't be too much longer before that winds up. Heath is another place where work still continues, but that actually is very close to being finished. At Heath, there have been some change orders because small things like bathrooms have to be fixed. They need some new faucets for the sink. The auditorium chairs were not able to be reused, so we're still waiting on that. But we are almost at the point where a certificate of substantial completion will be issued, and that is kind of the end of the process. So Heath is in very good shape. Most of the meeting was devoted to the Unified Arts Building. The Unified Arts Building, the shell of the building, is in need of renovation, greatly in need of renovation. The slate roof, which is over 100 years old, has to be replaced. And they were concerned, also very concerned, with the 4 chimneys on the roof, which were in bad condition, and that has to be restored immediately. That, I believe, will be started over the summer. There's an issue with the fact that the building is occupied, and it's hard to do certain kinds of things in an occupied building, but they have ways of building out the front of the building so that people can come in and out without a great deal of difficulty. The slate roof, they would like to replace the slate roof with slate. Believe me, that would be best. We looked at some artificial slate that they put on roofs, and it is not anything that we would like to see on this building. That's a historic building. The Preservation Commission is also very much involved here. The slate roof, the slates are cracked, and the nails that were used, 100 and some years ago, were not the proper nails. So they were the wrong shape, so they made holes in the slate, which caused some of the cracking. And what is under the slate has completely deteriorated, so it's like powder under there. So that has to be done very quickly. The problem is that the estimate came in at $1,385,000, and there is only $1,200,000 budgeted. So the question is, how can we do this? Can we phase this? Because other parts of the facade of the building need to be done. David Pollock on the commission looked at the facade of the building, and he said that the masonry work is thin, but it doesn't immediately need to be repaired, so we could phase it in such a way that we do the roof. The chimneys are top priority, the slate roof is second, and then work with the rest, maybe putting it off the rest of the facade for another year. It's a complicated project. It's clearly one that has to be done and one that has to be well done, because it is a historic building, and we would like it to end up looking much the same as it does today. And that's really all I have, unless people have questions.
Thank you, Ms. Scotto. Questions from the floor? Well, it was a very thorough explanation, and I appreciate that very much.
Tell you about the copper gutters with the steel strapping as well, which made that deteriorate, but I won't.
Spare me.
Just go to the next building commission meeting.
Right.
Okay. If that's the, Ms. Chalupsky, is that it for the Capital Subcommittee? Okay, so Ms. Scotto, actually, you're up for the Curriculum
I'm on
Subcommittee.
for the Curriculum
Yes.
Committee, and that's a very short report. On March 21st, before the school committee meeting, starting at 5:20, we will have one of our school improvement plan meetings, and Jennifer Flewelling from Devotion will be speaking. Judith Flewelling, I'm sorry. Jennifer Flewelling. Judith Flewelling was somebody I went to college with, sorry. Jennifer Flewelling. And she won't be speaking. No, surely not. In any event, it's held in the 4th floor conference room, and you are all welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Scotto. That's it?
That's it.
Government Relations, Ms. Stone.
Government
Relations has nothing to report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. That's short and sweet. Negotiations, Dr. Warren?
Negotiations has very little to report. We have been having trouble getting to a time that's mutually convenient to meet with the food service workers, but so we're just playing ping pong with dates.
Fine. I'm sure we'll hear more later then.
I hope so.
I kind of remember that kind of a problem. Thank you very much. Now, policy review, Ms. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are going to start tonight with the vote on the policy on criminal history checks of employees, volunteers, and others. I want to give Ms. Kershaw a chance to recuse herself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the risk of being redundant, due to my employment with the Department of Children and Families, I've been advised to recuse myself from deliberations and vote related to criminal offender record information background checks. So I will leave the room, and I'd like the record to reflect that. Thank you.
Thank you. We will.
And we will hope to remember to recall you, right?
We're done. There is, unless someone has come up with a question since the first reading of this, our discussion was complete. There were no suggestions for changes to this policy on criminal background checks, except for the placing of 2 missing hyphens in the original draft, which Ms. Coyne, I'll point out to you before we publish it in the policy book. So I would move the committee's favorable vote on the revision of this policy.
So we have a motion and a second. Are there comments, please? I just want to thank Ms. Stone. She's been working on a number of different policies, some of which, including this one, present some really interesting challenges. So thank you very much for that. Not seeing any requests for additional comments. All those who are in favor, please raise their hands. Those opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to report on the last policy subcommittee meeting as well. We have a very full docket this year, and we have been moving right along. We had a really good conversation around our current policy reviews, one on residency requirements. The residency requirements certainly haven't changed for the public schools, but the question of providing proof of residency and how often and in what form that proof should be asked for and collected has been the focus of this policy review. The committee was considering adding a requirement for annual residency proof from parents and guardians. We had a robust conversation about the nature of the burden that places, the administrative issues involved, and we will have the next policy meeting will be coming back to that with a more complete draft after it's been discussed with council. We also talked at length about the policy around the use of school space or rental of school space or entire buildings. There is our policy is a sort of a hodgepodge of past agreements about some buildings and sort of general principles about the use of spaces in schools in the non-school hours. There's no real consistent guidance in that policy, however, about how principals should allocate it, how we collect fees, if any fees are relevant. And so we're trying to clean up the policy so it's more transparent and easier for anyone in the community who wants to use school spaces to know what their obligations are in terms of applying for it and the likelihood of their being able to get space. And the superintendent has also asked for a revision of this because the principals have been asking for some relief of the confusion that often arises in the distribution of space in and around the schools after school. So this is a complicated policy. It has lots of implications both for the school's leadership and also for the parents and community members who use it. So we're going to come back with a more detailed policy recommendation at our next meeting, which will be in April. And that is my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stone. Are there other liaisons that people would like to discuss? Ms. Chalupsky.
Just real quickly, I went to a Beep Connections meeting on March 5th, Monday, I think it was the 5th of March. And I continue to be impressed with the collaboration between our early childhood programs and all the town organizations that touch our early childhood programs, from BAT TV to the Brookline Community Mental Health Center to the Recreation Department, which has done some wonderful work together with us in terms of our early childhood summer programs and sort of partnering with us and helping kids and families get a lot of the services and activities that they need. So I just wanted to highlight that, and also to let people know that the Parent-Child Home Program had their fundraiser on the snowstorm night, but a lot of people came out. It was really very well done, and they put together a video that we could probably ask for. BAT TV actually did that. They put together the video of the program, explaining it and having parents talk about it. So I may ask them to try and share it with us. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other? Okay, yes, Ms. Ditkoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two updates. One is from the Brookline Education Foundation, where I have the pleasure of being the liaison. As you know, that there was no mini raffle this year, Cooper Mini, and so or iPods or anything else like that. So what this year's big event for the Brookline Education Foundation is the Trivia Bee on March 22nd at 7 p.m. They're asking for teams of 6. And you can also do it as individuals. They have put out a challenge to the school committee to see if perhaps we will field a team. So we have to collectively decide that, apparently in open meetings, since we don't meet without the public. I'm not suggesting that we do that right now, but it is worth discussing. Anyway, there are wonderful prizes. There's a raffle as well, and I believe you could do the raffle even if you're not coming to the event. So sign up for the raffle if you are busy on March 22nd. Sign up for the event if you're not. It's in the Heath School cafeteria, and should be a great deal of fun. And obviously the Brookline Education Foundation supports so many district initiatives and has so many innovative ideas of their own that we're always encouraging of the community to support them. So that's one. The second one is that the Strategic Plan Committee had its umpteenth meeting, so it's hard to keep track, this afternoon. My fellow attendees are somewhere in the back: Dr. Wenda Shubo, Dr. Fisher-Mueller, Mr. Chang, some other friends. We have a robust set of discussions, and just so you know where we are, we've had our first parent and community forum, which was last week, and we will have 2 more. The dates of which I am pulling up right now. March 27th, Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. and April 2nd at 7 p.m. March 27th will be here at Town Hall, and April 2nd will be in South Brookline. So we want to make sure we can cover the waterfront, or we don't have waterfront. Anyway, cover the town. The good news is that we've made a lot of progress, a lot of rich discussion about trends in pedagogy, trends in schools. What do schools look like now that they didn't look like 5 years ago? And the strategic plan has begun to take shape in that it will still have our core values, and there will still be goals. And underneath those goals, we will have what are the most important results that we expect to see. So in plain English, what does it look like if we've succeeded, as well as the priorities, the most important actions and things that we need to make that happen. So we're going for a jargon-free but still clear, we're using professional language in some places, but as long as it's clear and transparent to really anyone who reads the strategic plan, since it really is a document that's used throughout the whole system. It's used by the school committee in our budget deliberations. on an annual basis. It's used by the superintendent and the deputy superintendent in their communications with principals and coordinators. It's used by principals framing the school improvement plan. So we have a blessing of a strategic plan that's really used and thought about on a monthly, daily, weekly basis. That process is important. It's ongoing. We still hope to conclude by the end of the year, certainly the most important goals and results, and then the action plans obviously will take a little bit of time to fill in. But we're excited about it. And again, there was a little bit of confusion at the last parent forum, so I just want to be clear. The parent forums are for the 3 to 5 year vision of the district's priorities and what's important. They're not budget forums, even though they're happening at the same time. They're both happening before the budget vote. We won't be speaking about anything that directly affects this year's FY14 budget. But if you do have thoughts about the priorities of the district, that's the place to come. So I'm open to questions.
Questions from the committee?
I have one. Ms. Ditkoff, when does the school committee get to take a look at the product, and is there a vote?
So we're still aiming for the May timeframe, June timeframe for the school committee to have a chance to look at it in depth. The action plans, and Dr. Fisher-Mueller, please correct me if I'm wrong, my sense is the action plans and the benchmarks associated with did we implement X, Y, or Z will not be done by the end of June. So I think it's our decision if we want to try to vote the plan before the detail is fleshed out. That will need a little bit more time. Are you nodding yes or no? I can't see. Yes, okay. So I think that will take a little bit more time and work to flesh out. So I think it's really up to us. Do we want to vote the goals and results, which in the priorities document, we'll take a look at that in May, June. We can decide at that point if that's enough detail for us to vote, or if we want to wait and see what the action plans look like, in which case I think we're probably looking about the fall time frame. But the committee's work is intended to be done May, June on the strategic plan.
Thank you, Ms. Ditkoff. Other questions? Okay, I'll just mention also the B-Space Committee. As I look around the room, there are lots of people here tonight, and I have a feeling they're not here to know more about the B-Space Committee, and we do publish our minutes. So I'm just going to say that we had, I think, a great meeting this past Monday, and it covered the doctors Lupini and Fisher-Mueller both presented some very interesting alternatives regarding how the new school might look. They were very clear that these were only some of the alternatives that were available. They were not all inclusive. There was a robust discussion about them, and one idea which emerged from the committee itself to add to that. And the second part of the meeting was involved in Ms. Stone's presentation as to how we might most effectively communicate not only what's happening in the B-Space Committee on an ongoing basis to our various constituencies, but also to communicate clearly the dates and times of the 2 public hearings that we are planning to do to have people give us their input before we even begin to try and come to any conclusions. And those public hearings were on the calendar, which you saw earlier. And I'm not sure that I can remember the dates. I think one is April 8th. And the other one is May 14th, both 13th, sorry, both on Mondays to start at 6:30. And the locations, depending on what our sense is of the audience that we're likely to have, could be either here or, if we can find one, a larger venue. We just don't know that yet. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Brookline Learning Series thing that's part of these, or?
part of these.
Yeah, well, because it's for both. Or no.
Right. No, why don't you
So-
mention, because...
So
yes.
one of the things that we pride ourselves on in Brookline is always being open to, I guess we had been calling it continuous improvement, and then it became a culture of inquiry and innovation this afternoon. So it's now a culture of inquiry and innovation, in case anyone's wondering. At any rate, so one of the things we wanted to do is make sure we were consistently accessing the best expertise from outside of Brookline from a pedagogical perspective. And so it was an imperative both from the strategic plan committee members as well as the B-Space members to say, if we're going to be looking at a ninth school, if we're going to be looking at the strategic plan, let's make sure that we're as up to date as possible on the best practices nationally. And this being Brookline, we do have a fair number of people who live in town and who are parents in our system who are nationally known experts on education as it happens. So when we talk about issues of rigor, when we talk about issues of educational equity, when we talk about non-cognitive learning, when we talk about all these different, using data to improve instruction, we really do have nationally and internationally known people here in town. So the idea was to create a learning series for ourselves, accessing some of our best and brightest. So the first one we're actually going to have is tonight, a little bit later tonight, a professor from the Kennedy School and a devotion father, Chris Avery, who focuses on college persistence and specifically with low-income students, but what does it mean, how do you measure it, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But there are going to be at least 2 and potentially 3 or 4 more experts who are coming to address us on that variety of topics this spring. So they'll be happening here in open session. They'll be on BATV, and so if people want copies of them, if they can't make it here to the meeting, we can make that happen. But anyway, we thought it was very important to again continually refresh ourselves as we look nationally for best practices and around these things that we care a lot about.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Ditkoff. Yes, Ms. Cox.
Will there be another meeting of the B-Space Committee before the public hearing?
Yes.
And it falls on, does it fall on the Monday again, which is the first night of Passover?
The next one may be on a Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken, because Monday is a holiday. And I think it starts at 6 rather than 6:30 because of a commitment that somebody else had, and we were able to make that adjustment. And it is also on our calendar.
Great, thank you.
Okay, if there's no other comment, we come to public comment, and there are many people here who were not here when I said a few words about public comment tonight, and I'm making an assumption. How many people are here tonight? Why don't I just find out how many people are here for public comment tonight? Raise your hands. Okay. To make public comment. Okay, so that's good. I want to keep the public comment period to the period that's identified in 15 minutes because, as Ms. Ditkoff said, we have Professor Avery here, and I want him to be able to speak at the time that we told him we would reserve for him to speak. There are apparently only 3 people who are signed up, and okay, if the 3 people who signed up take up the 15 minutes, then we will halt the public comment, as I said before, at that time, so that the rest of the school committee document can be taken care of in the time that's committed. And then if there is anyone else who wishes to make public comment, we can, at the end of the session, accommodate them. We do have need of an executive session tonight, so we want to also be careful of that because we don't want to go too late. So those of you who have signed up for public comment, the first person I have is Ginger Melton. You're going to pass. Well, okay, how about Chad Ellis? Is he here? Okay, Chad. Yes, thank you very much. And I just want to thank Mr. Ellis because he is actually speaking on behalf of several people who initially wanted to speak and agreed that they would enable Mr. Ellis to speak for all of them, and I appreciate that very much.
Thank you. You've stolen my opening line, so I was. I'll start just by saying who I am. My name is Chad Ellis. Some of you probably know me as Yellow House Guy from the Runkle renovation. I'm a Runkle dad with 2 daughters in 1st and 3rd grade at Runkle. I'm also a town meeting member for Precinct 12. As Mr. Morse said, there were quite a number of people who wanted to speak tonight about ECS, and given the short public comment, we were asked to choose just one, and inexplicably they've chosen me. But both to sort of acknowledge that and to give the room a sense of this, I'd like the people who were here for ECS to just raise your hands. Thanks. I just want to start by talking about what the ECS program is and what it isn't. When I was a kid, I was one of either 1 or 2 kids in my grade, depending on the grade, who was part of the Talented and Gifted program, and I was very lucky to be a part of that. The ECS program here is different. It isn't something that serves only the advanced learners. The ECS program really helps a very wide range of children, both directly through in-class lessons and indirectly by supporting the differential instruction efforts by teachers. This is important to note because of the 2 programs identified as helping to meet the gap created by eliminating ECS, Grade Acceleration and the Virtual High School, do serve only a tiny number of the most accelerated learners. So they can't be a replacement for ECS. And the fact that they're offered as a replacement suggests that people may not be aware of how broad a program ECS really is. ECS is one of the most cost-effective programs we have. It represents 0.3% of the budget, and yet I would, without hesitation, call it the most important single part of my daughter's Runkle experience. And that's a high bar. Like a lot of people in this room, we moved to Brookline because of the excellent public schools. So the fact that this is number 1 for us is saying something. ECS isn't state mandated, but Brookline Public Schools have never aimed merely to do what the state requires. Educational equity and academic excellence are core Brookline values. Advanced learners have real needs, and all children deserve an education that challenges them to live up to their full potential. ECS is already a bare-bones program. There's no excess capacity to cut, which I assume is why the proposed partial restoration doesn't try to do less of the same. Instead, it eliminates the personal in-class educators that are the core of the program and hopes to replace them with technology. Now, we all recognize the serious budget challenges Brookline schools are facing. We also recognize that restoring the ECS budget would require painful cuts elsewhere, and we're mindful of the other enrichment-related cuts in music, the arts, and athletics. We believe, however, that the ECS program is too important to lose, and that its purpose cannot be fulfilled with partial restoration. When economic challenges are not so severe, we should look to expand ECS, but even now we should at least preserve it. We hope you'll reconsider the importance of ECS when preparing the final budget for 2014. We are available to discuss options and will work with you in whatever ways we can to help make this happen and to preserve this critical program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ellis. That was great, and it was within a short period of time, and we're most grateful to you for that. It was also very substantive, and we appreciate that as well. Meredith Huntley.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Lupini, ladies and gentlemen. I am the kindergarten or 1st grade through 8th grade music teacher at the Heath School, and I'm here, as Mr. Ellis did, just to shed some light on what the music program currently is and will not be next year, should it not even be considered to return to the budget, at least partially. The proposed budget cuts for the music department for next year affect more than 5,000 children. Kindergarten through 3rd grade meeting once a week. I just listened to Ms. Charlapsky talk about early childhood. You know as well as I do and as parents do how important music education is in early childhood. There are test scores from all over the world showing how music increases children's ability to learn, to do math, to do sports, to socialize. The permanent cuts to middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade general music are the least appropriate thing for middle schoolers at their age developmentally. I think a hidden issue that's going on here is that the cuts to personnel, although everybody feels how tight the budget is and recognizes sometimes these things have to happen, will spread one teacher across all 8 schools for 1,000 band students. Currently, one teacher across all 8 schools for 1,000 string students. Because the way the cuts went on the totem pole, it took out more of certain teachers than others because it was done by hire date. All I'm asking and sort of pleading for is that perhaps the school board, Dr. Lupini, the team in charge of the budget, could re-examine perhaps adding back at least part of the proposed budget cuts for music. And obviously I understand, again, how tight things are, but perhaps shaving a little here and there might be more conducive to teaching the whole child, to preserving equity for families that can't necessarily get private lessons for their students outside of school. And like was mentioned for ECS, instead of chopping entire programs in half or completely, looking at the greater whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Huntley, and once again, a very substantive set of comments in a relatively short period of time, which once again we appreciate very much. I did neglect to, there are a lot of people here, and I just wanted to explain that in public comment, we don't, as a matter of practice, respond. So by not responding, I don't want you to think that we're not listening very carefully and we will not discuss the comments you've made. I want everybody to understand that clearly. Chris Linson. Okay. We had one more person who wanted to very good. Thank you very much. Well, you can. We'd like to know when you come up who you are and what aspect of our school system you represent, and I would ask you to also keep your remarks
very brief.
short.
I will indeed.
Thank you.
My name is Cher Kelly, and I'm a mom to my son Luca, who goes to devotion school. And you may recognize his face because he was in the tab today as honorable mention for the 3rd grade science fair. My son just turned 9 yesterday, so that was the best gift for him. Because here's a little boy who, through the course of his schooling, was put in a special school for kids with severe disabilities. Then we moved to Newton, and they put him in an integrated classroom. And then here, partial integration, and now in a full integrated class with no IEP, no special education services. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it's part of my story, his story. That the most important thing and most effective thing as a learning tool for this little kid and many other peers that are in his school that we know that are kind of on that cups of really bright, but they cannot get the instruction on a big class or even small class group instruction within the regular class, and the town has to put so much money into a special education. They can work with a regular education teacher on a unit such as they did this year for 3 months called Structures, which it took math, it took literature, it took science, and put it all together. And take someone like this little guy who you would think would be average at best, and he's now, with the help of this program, this one person in the program, placing 3rd grade, in the 3rd grade science fair devotion in honorable mention. And that's a huge, huge thing that Brookline has done for my son and for so many other kids like him that say they all learn differently. So let's try to like work with the average, the masses, but also let's try to bring those kids on the fringe that maybe need some extra help and support over here through special instruction or special education or a different way of learning, or the kids that maybe don't need special instruction but their lights get turned on by something else. And my little boy is one of them, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Okay, no one else has signed up, and no one else has asked to speak, and so, yes. For how long, ma'am?
3 minutes? 4 at the most?
How about 3?
I'll try. I tend to speak too fast, but that's not good.
I'll let you know when 2.5 minutes is over, okay? Just to do you a favor.
Thank you. My name is Alia Guseva, and I'm a Driscoll parent. I came in defense of the enrichment program, and I just wanted to add some of my thoughts on this. I have a daughter in 7th grade. She's an advanced learner across the curriculum, but particularly in math, and she's benefited greatly from the program, and particularly from the specialist, Ellen Davidson, who's been our really person that ran the program in Driscoll. I have a son who's a kindergartner, and he just started a small pull-out group with Ellen last week. The problem that I have is I'm growing convinced that while we've been pouring money and resources in closing the achievement gap and making sure that no child is left behind, we're not providing regular adequate support to advanced learners, and sometimes leave them bored or demotivated, and in some cases that leads to them expressing their boredom in the ways of that are not necessarily appropriate behaviorally. So I think by skimping on academic enrichment, we may be inadvertently contributing to behavioral issues in the classroom. More importantly, and I think that's the main point I want to make, is I think we need to move beyond the cookie-cutter approach to education and recognize that kids have different strengths and weaknesses, and this is sort of in line with the previous speaker, and their academic needs cannot be approached in a standard way. Some say if you want individual approach, you have to go to private school. I disagree. And I believe that the enrichment program that we have had in Brookline for a few years has clearly showed up that it's possible to do in a public school setting. Ellen Davidson has been an incredible resource to both children and teachers, sometimes leading pull-out groups, but other times supporting teachers in their attempts to develop differentiated curriculum in the classroom. It is demoralizing to me as a parent, quite honestly, to think that the school district doesn't value what Ellen does or what it means for the quality of education at Driscoll. I think it's also an unfortunate signal that perhaps we don't take the values, the needs, of advanced learners seriously. On the website of Brookline Public School, the mission is worded as to emphasize high expectations for all children and support them to reach their full potential. I want to suggest something. There's a concept that's gaining popularity in healthcare delivery, and that is patient-centered care. How about we have child-centered education? Why cannot we seriously commit to the mission statement and follow through with it? Why cannot we take seriously the goal of keeping students engaged, motivated, and appropriately challenged all across achievement gaps? Continuing to support ECS, I think, is one important real step in this direction. It is our responsibility to our kids and to the teachers who have relied on Ellen Davidson for help to continue funding the program. And I think what the new budget seems to be saying is that we cannot afford it. And I think that we cannot afford not to do it, not to continue supporting the program. I was at a Driscoll meeting with Superintendent Lupini just last week, and I want to briefly touch upon the issue of partial restoration of opportunities that somebody mentioned. I fully agreed with what has been said, that it's absolutely not a solution to replacing the enrichment program. I think there are significant social and psychological costs to acceleration that many parents, including my husband and myself, just not willing to bear, and it has very limited application. And my
I'm going to have to stop you in another 30 seconds,
okay.
ma'am. Thank you.
So I just want to tell you that a few days ago, my kindergartner brought a project he did in school, and when he showed the project to me, his eyes sparkled. This is something that he did with Ellen, and this is the sparkle that brought me here today and kind of compelled me to get up and talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you so much. And now we're going to move along to Dr. Lupini's superintendent's report, please.
Sometimes forget when that comes right after public comment. Thank you. You have a brief report in your materials There are 2 staff recognitions here and then an item about our Steps to Success program. I wanted to mention to you this evening, a very busy evening, that Dawn Carney, our coordinator of world languages, has been elected to the board of directors of the Massachusetts Foreign Language Association for a 4-year term. We're thrilled that Dawn was willing to take on that challenge and serve on this important board for all of the world language teachers statewide. And that Bob Thomas, the educational technology specialist at Driscoll School, has been selected as one of the recipients of the Golden Foundation for Excellence in Education Award, which will be presented to him on Thursday, April 11th at Watertown Middle School. We've had a number of outstanding educators win this award over the years. Bob certainly belongs among this group. These award winners are recognized for outstanding achievement and contribution in the classroom, in their school, and in the community. Congratulations to Bob for a well-deserved honor. With respect to Steps to Success, I've informed school committee over the past few weeks that Onita Horn, who's worked for the last number of years as our College Success Initiative advisor, is now going to be our interim director of Steps to Success for the remainder of this school year following the resignation of Carrie Weatherhead. I want to make sure that I point out here this evening that because of the sudden nature of this resignation, we want to reassure STS students, families, and supporters that STEPS remains a strong and vibrant organization, and we're thrilled to have Ms. Horn as the interim director of the program. We're also very, very pleased that the director, or that the advisors in the program, J.T. Lennick, Amber Gaddy, Kendall Jones, Melissa O'Brien, and Marissa Drossos, have continued to do such really terrific work with our students and families during this what's been a rather difficult transition period. I'm working with the board of directors to create a timeline and a process for hiring the next coordinator, and our goal is to have someone in place by July 1st of this year. That's my report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lupini. Are there questions, please? Seeing none, I'd like to then go to the next docket item, which is has to do with school early dismissal dates. And Dr. Lupini, I believe you're up again.
Thank you. So unfortunately, I have nothing to report to you this evening. We continue to try to discuss this school calendar and where we may fall in terms of early dismissal dates, in terms of the collaborative time that's in the agreement for the beginning of next school year. I hope to be able to bring you something next week. As I've said to anyone that will listen and some that won't, I think it's critical that we're able to provide parents with a calendar at worst by the 31st of this month, and it is our goal to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lupini. Ms. Ditko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the risk of sounding slightly alarmist, parents are, inquiring minds want to know, what might we do to, what might it take to accelerate this process? I mean, everyone else has their calendar out. Parents are asking about when we're going to have our calendar out.
So we have a calendar out. What we don't have are early dismissal days within that calendar. And I think next week's meeting is about as far as we can go in terms of being able to do that, and then we'll have to make some decisions. But as I said, I'm trying to look at, certainly by the end of next week, or by the, at worst by the 31st, we're going to have a calendar in parents' hands.
Okay. And do you feel confident there's a good process to make these decisions?
I feel confident we'll have a calendar in parents' hands before the 31st.
Thank you, Dr. Lupini.
Other questions? Okay, thank you very much. And Dr. Lupini, I guess I'm sorry, it's now time for Professor Chris Avery, if he's here. Is he here? Because we're now a little early.
I told him we may be late, so.
Okay. Well, Dr. Lupini has scheduled about 15 minutes for the budget message, and would it be okay for you to do that? And then
That's entirely up to you.
If Professor Avery comes, we could take him, and then we could go to oh, okay. Thank you.
Welcome, you're on.
It was, and we're running very efficiently.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Not at all.
So, I have an introduction for
Great.
So first of all, Chris, I led you astray. I told you we might be running late, and then you said you wanted to arrive early just in case, and I said, nah, we never run early.
Well, it would have been even earlier if I'd been able to find parking closer than 6 blocks away.
Which is unusual.
Welcome to Town Hall.
While Chris is getting ready, I will introduce him briefly. As I mentioned earlier, this is part of our, this is the first inaugural attempt, I should say, to bring in a group of education experts who happen to live in town or nearby and who have thoughts and can give us their advice and guidance on various aspects of the trade-offs and the decisions we're thinking about. So we're delighted to welcome Professor Chris Avery, who is the Roy E. Larson Professor of Public Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He is not to be confused with the other Chris Avery, if should you Google him, who is a professional arena football player. He is, in fact, a faculty advisor to the Strategic Data Project. The Strategic Data Project is a partnership among districts, charter management networks, state education agencies, and a bunch of others. And their mission is to sort of use data to improve instruction and improve education around the country. So they work with a number of districts on issues. So Chris's research in particular focuses on college attendance and persistence, and he's here to give us insight into many questions that we've been discussing at length at the school committee. Things like what are strategies to improve matriculation, especially of low-income students, the concept of undermatching, which was a new one for me, but it's the idea that that people attend less selective colleges and perhaps they could be attending or they're qualified to be attending, and how to know that and see it, again, especially with low-income populations, but not necessarily exclusively. And anyway, lots of other factors affecting college persistence. So I will stop there. Chris has a presentation for us. My guess is that our committee, after all the conversations we've had about, is it college attendance, is it post-secondary credentials, how do we get people to go, what does guidance look like? I mean, after all the conversations we've had over the last few years, we may have lots of questions for you too. So thank you.
Okay, so I know I'm coming in the middle of a long-term discussion about many, many issues. So what I thought I would try to do tonight is just introduce some of the work that has been done with the Strategic Data Project, give you a sense for the kinds of questions that other districts have been taking on and the advice that my colleagues and I have been trying to give them, and some very initial thoughts on how this might be relevant for Brookline and how Brookline is very, very different. I'm happy to take on any questions and really learn from all of you, because you'll know much more. You obviously know much more about the ins and outs of the district than I do. As Susan said, the Strategic Data Project is a partnership of school districts, charter networks, and state agencies. And actually, what's not on here, this is a boilerplate language from the website. Researchers from Harvard and elsewhere around the country, economists and statisticians who have been doing work related to education, and we're anxious to collaborate with districts and now with state departments of education. The initial funding was primarily from the Gates Foundation, and there have been more than 30 partners to date. If you just Google Strategic Data Project, you can find out lots of information. There are many presentations, including public versions of reports that have been produced for many of the participating districts. Initially, almost all the partners were districts, and now we've moved on, as I said, to starting to work with some state departments of education, including Massachusetts. As a starting point, we decided the goal of the Strategic Data Project was to produce some very basic analysis, both to whet the appetite of the districts for some more detailed work, and also to address some questions that seem to come up over and over again in all the districts. Many of the participating districts would also have what we call data fellows, which were 1 or 2 full-time new employees who were statistically trained but also well-versed in educational issues to try to push the districts to innovate in a variety of ways. One of the things that's often said behind closed doors is that we're trying to get districts to think about data going beyond compliance to actually changing policy. And typically there's really two standard diagnostic analyses that are really the starting point for the engagement with any of these districts. One is related to, it's called the human capital diagnostic. It's really related to teacher performance and retention. I don't want to talk about this as much today. I've done some work in this area, but at Susan's suggestion, I'd like to focus on the second one. But I will say one or two things about the teacher performance, so you'll get an understanding. Oops. So you'll get an understanding of the kinds of ideas that are in play. In Massachusetts, I think everything is done, analyzed now using student growth percentages, and in other districts, there's language about teacher value added. Essentially, what the state of the art, for better or for worse, in assessing teacher performance comprises of is tracking student test scores in different classrooms and seeing which teachers seem to be contributing to the fastest growth in test scores based on what students were doing and how they were performing in the past. I think we're moving beyond that as well to lots of in-class assessments and videotaping and coaching with teachers, but the starting point is analyzing teachers based on improvements in, or lack of improvements in test scores. And the question for all the districts is, where are the good teachers being assigned? What happens to teachers over time? Are new teachers as good in performance as older teachers? And all the districts really are interested in questions about the achievement gap. One of the most interesting findings is that new teachers often do not seem to perform as well on these statistical measures as veteran teachers, but new teachers do improve. So that's a good phenomenon. But that new teachers tend to be assigned to students who are the lowest performing. So that's a kind of a really bad, subtle problem that could be happening is if the newest teachers are working with the students who need the most help and the newest teachers aren't really prepared to help them. On the college-going side, some of these questions about the achievement gap arise as well, where achievement gap may have to do with any number of dimensions, from families with lower income to minority races and a variety of other measures of students needing more help or the gap in achievement. We focus, in addition to thinking about the achievement gap, we focus on two areas. One is the path to high school graduation. Which schools are there some schools doing better than others based on where students started in terms of their previous grades and 8th grade test scores? Are some students having higher rates of graduation for similar students than others? And statistically, that's designed to promote questions. At the district level, then you would like the district to say, well, if some schools are doing better than others, can we get down into the level of the school to try to find out why that might or might not be happening? Similarly, we ask lots of questions about college enrollment and persistence, and this comes closer to my own research and interests. One of the central questions of these diagnostics, and particularly with regard to the college enrollment decisions, is to guide changes in practice based on some evidence. And as I said, ideally, we identify phenomena that are of interest to the district, and then start looking into the district, get the district, if it's excited, to try to look into its practices and see if some of them might be improved, or to see if there are exemplary schools or departments that have figured out lessons that could be transferred to other parts of the district. Susan's introduced introduced the idea of two questions where we have guided some changes in practice based on this large-scale analysis. And unfortunately, both have some buzzwords to them. One is summer melt, and the other is undermatch. And I'll talk briefly about both of them, and then I have a few ideas that I would suggest as the starting point for further thought, but I'm happy to take lots of questions at that point as well. Summer melt, I had experienced when I had worked in some college access programs working with students in the Boston Public Schools, but I have to attribute mostly to a doctoral student we've been working with named Ben Castleman, who's a very bright guy who came up with the term and documented it a lot in data and has helped us to go to districts and then look at this phenomenon in the districts. We matched plans reported by students on high school exit surveys to college enrollment compiled by an organization called the National Student Clearinghouse. So when I looked at the Massachusetts Department of Education, I found some figures about Brookline and other districts that I kind of already knew, but interestingly, most of the reported statistics are based on exit surveys, and not actually, as from what I can tell, not actually based on documented and validated college enrollments. Typically, as Ben Castleman's research suggested, and we found in all these districts, about 20% of the students who report very specific college plans, I'm going to Suffolk, I've paid a deposit, at the time of high school graduation actually don't enroll the next fall. So when you compare the percentages of students who the high schools think are going to college with the percentage of the students who actually show up, there's a big discrepancy. One caveat is that all the districts we've been working with have been large public school districts with pretty high percentages of low-income students and students on free and reduced price lunch, and relatively low college enrollment rates. By comparison to Brookline, these are much poorer performing districts on every measure. So I don't know, one of the things we haven't figured out is if we've never really worked with a high performing district, because Brookline doesn't need us in the same way that so many of these other districts do. We don't know if that phenomenon would be true here as well. But this 20% is pretty consistent, plus or minus a few percentage points across all the districts that we worked with. And so Ben Castleman and another doctoral student named Lindsay Page then got some grant money, conducted these large-scale interventions where they matched up students on a randomized basis, and they said, if there's students who have solid college plans at the time of graduation who aren't actually showing up, we should try to see if we can change that by providing them some help in the summer. And the randomized trials of college counseling in the summer after high school graduation, which is sort of a paradoxical time to think about providing additional counseling. You'd think that most people would have found their counselors and sorted out their plans before that. That actually turns out to yield statistically significant increases in college enrollment. And so several of the districts that we've worked with are now systematically trying to do this college counseling in the summer after high school graduation with this in mind. So that's the idea of summer melt. And we think of that as really one of our big successes, because we started with a statistical analysis of the exit surveys, and we were being pedantic. We just matched up the exit surveys, and we're going line by line in a spreadsheet. And lo and behold, we found something interesting that has now led into what we think is changes in practice and hopefully improvements in outcomes for lots of those students. For the idea of undermatch, I'm going to, without apology, present work that's not my own, that comes from the Consortium for School Research in Chicago that did some very innovative work. I know that these slides you won't be able to see exactly what they are, so I'll just give you a little bit of a highlight. Each of these lines, first line is tracking students, this first graph is tracking students from completing high school all the way out to potentially enrolling in a four-year college, and there's questions about do they plan to attend, do they apply, do they gain admission, do they enroll? And there's 5 different lines according to academic qualifications. The top line is the line for students who they believe are qualified for admission to the most selective colleges. So they're thinking that these are students in the Chicago School District who could get into, let's say, the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, possibly Northwestern. So they're talking about the highest achieving students in a really broad district. And the punchline of this is that it starts off with, everyone starts off at 100% because they're including everyone at the far left, just graduating from high school. And at every single step, planning to attend, applying, admitted, and enrolled, a little bit falls off. And by the far right, only 80% of those students who are their highest performers are actually enrolled in a four-year college. And so now you see in the lower lines, each one of the less highly qualified students in each group it's a lower percentage, but similarly, even the next two they feel are qualified for admission to reasonably selective colleges, and it's 40 and 60% of them are going to four-year colleges. So the phenomenon here is that students who are the most qualified are not necessarily going to selective colleges, are not necessarily even going to four-year colleges. So in terms of low-hanging fruit, it seems like in Chicago and elsewhere, a natural thing to say is, why don't you just find the students who've already made their way through a difficult process, the K-12 system, have accomplished a lot, have outstanding qualifications. Why not just make sure that all of them get to go to college? And secondly, a second question, related point, is that many of the students who go to less than the most selective colleges may be hampering themselves from the very beginning. And not because I believe that selective colleges are better in general than less selective colleges are more prestigious, but just they have higher graduation rates. In Virginia, where I've done some research with my colleague Sarah Turner, who's a professor at the University of Virginia. We found that lots and lots of students, instead of going to Virginia Tech or the University of Virginia, where they might be qualified to go, were going to less selective public colleges like Virginia Commonwealth. The difference in 4 and 5 year graduations from those schools is 70% at the more selective colleges, 30% at the less selective colleges. So you're putting yourself against the odds if you're a highly qualified student not going to the most selective college you can. Of course, the real reason to worry about this is this correlation. We know that the students who don't make it through the college admission system are the students who have the least support in terms of peer networks and parents who've already gone to college. So low SES students who are highly qualified are the ones who are falling off in these kinds of graphs. And that was actually why I've been drawn to this research to begin with, is the fear that college admissions is screening out students who are highly qualified who really should be beating the odds from their backgrounds of being first generation to go to college, disadvantaged in a variety of other ways, and yet the complexity of the college admissions process and the trickiness of it, in fact, is holding them back. The Chicago folks have another graph, and what they did, this is another where they look at graduation rates. It's a very simple graph. They look at some of the most popular colleges for students from Chicago to attend, and they grade them on the horizontal axis by high school GPA. So this is a range from 2.0 to 4.0. We're looking at 4-year colleges. At the far right, I'll just call your attention to that. These are students who graduated with 4.0. So they've grouped a bunch of people. So let's say close to 4.0 as their GPA in high school. What's their graduation rate from college? Well, the very top is Northwestern. That's about 100%. Pretty much anybody who got a 4.0 in the Chicago Public Schools and goes to Northwestern will graduate. And some of that is that Northwestern is selecting among the students with the 4.0s the ones who seem the most promising as well. However, at the bottom, there's another one, Northeastern Illinois. 30% of the students in Northeastern Illinois from the university from the Chicago Public System graduate. It's a 30% graduation rate for students with a 4.0 GPA. And this is actually a pretty popular college, and I think that students in Chicago didn't really recognize this. And so this range of graduation rates is very consistent with this idea of undermatch. The students who are going to the less selective colleges, no matter how well qualified they were in advance, are tending not to graduate. Some thoughts on how that might have some implications for Brookline. Well, as I said, the first is that Brookline is very much different than Chicago and the other districts that we've worked with in the Strategic Data Project. It's a much higher performing district, much higher college going rate. Something for the statistics I've seen, it's about 80% of the graduates are going to 4-year colleges from Brookline High School. That's amazing. So I don't know if any of these phenomena would apply, but it's simple enough. It would be simple enough to do some basic analysis and find out. None of the analysis. I mean, what's I think striking to me as a sort of statistically trained person is that none of this analysis requires anything sophisticated. It just requires some sensible, dogged willingness to match up some data and ask some basic questions and see where it takes you. So I've spoken to Susan and Jennifer, and I know that Brookline has been tracking students through the National Student Clearinghouse. I know that the high school requires an exit survey. You have to fill it out in Naviance to graduate. So that means it would be, I think it would be pretty easily accessible to check the exit surveys against the National Student Clearinghouse validated records to see, are we getting a match? A second thing to see would be, then use that information to look and see, are the students who graduate with the highest qualifications taking advantage of those qualifications, no matter where they come from, what their parents went to college, what race they are they making it to really good colleges? And it may well be in Brookline that looking at the graduation rates would be interesting. It may well be that some colleges that will ordinarily seem like good colleges don't have such great graduation rates for the students who come from the high school. I'll point out one last thing and then I'll stop, because I see I've talked for longer than I had expected to. One interesting thing about Brookline, by comparison to a lot of these other districts, and also it's not so much Brookline but Massachusetts, is that in other states and other districts, we're going to push hard the idea of going to public colleges because the majority of students who are going to 4-year colleges are going to public colleges. And so it's natural to tell the guidance department or the school district, just concentrate on the public colleges because that's your bread and butter. Make sure that the students who could get into the good public colleges are going to be able to go and make sure they're applying, make sure that they complete the FAFSA and figure out if it's affordable, and put them in position to succeed in that way. In Brookline, according to this didn't surprise me, but according to the statistics on the Department of Education website, something like 2 or 3 times as many students who go to 4-year colleges are going to private colleges as opposed to public. That's the result of being, I think, being in Boston, where there are so many fantastic fantastic private colleges, when the top public college in the state is all the way out in Amherst, which is kind of a long haul. So I don't think that Brookline is going to be, I wouldn't be advising Brookline or any district in Boston to be looking to the public colleges in the same way I would be advising, I am going to be advising students in New York, and the New York Department of Education, which has, much more emphasis on its public education system. If I were advising a district if I were advising New York City or any of the other folks in New York, I would be saying, look to the public colleges. And so that is one more thing that's distinct about Brookline.
Bravo. Well, that should be plenty of food for thought. We thank you very much, Professor Avery, and I hope that there will be some interesting questions from the school committee. Do I see any? Ms. Chalupsky.
If somebody else wants to go first. Okay, I'll go for it. I thought this was very interesting, your whole presentation, but one of the assumptions you make is that the undermatch is why they're not graduating as opposed to other factors, or have you looked at other factors as to why they may not be graduating?
So any analysis of educational outcomes by SES is never going to capture all the facts. It's such a multifaceted, the education, as you're well aware, the educational process is such a multifaceted thing. Statistical lots of people, it's the holy grail of statistical analysis in education. Lots of people have tried to explain the differences in outcomes. Lots of people have taken on a variety of questions along those lines. There's never going to be an answer that's comprehensive. So I don't mean to suggest that anything I've said is comprehensive. When we talk about the summer melt, and when we talk about actually addressing that, 20% of the students don't typically make it to college, having thought that they were going to do so at high school graduation. If we're talking about what we think is really good result, we're getting 5% of those 20% of the students to go to college. And when we talk about addressing the fact that college low-income students, even going to good colleges, tend not to graduate as much, the idea of this undermatch, hopefully that would explain it. That would help to a proportion of them to do better. But you're right. It's not going to. No one thing is going to change educational outcomes so that all of a sudden it looks like a totally leveling playing field and every egalitarian outcomes across the board.
And just one follow-up: did you look beyond that 1 year when they're no longer in college? I mean, many kids today take 5.
Oh yeah, so the
5-year plan, 6-year plan.
So all this is we usually use a 5. We usually use a 5 and 6 year graduation rate. One of the things that the National Student Clearinghouse is going to enable folks to do is to track the effect of programs long term, not just which programs are getting students to college, which programs are getting students to college and having them succeed. Mm-hmm. It's early days for us, but for example, in at least one of the at least in one of the places where we've done the summer melt intervention work, the randomized trial results look better in year 2 than in year 1, which says that not only were they getting the students to colleges in year 1, but they were the right kinds of colleges to stay in year 2. A lot of times what happens with these kinds of interventions is you see a little bit of a fade out over time, and so we're sort of expecting that too.
Thank you.
Dr. Warren.
Thank you. This is very interesting, and this may be sort of a repeat of Helen's question, but have you unpacked some of the reasons, or does it quickly get to be anecdotal, why the low socioeconomic status students drop out? Is it because of lack of funds, discouragement, need to support other members of the family, or has somebody done any surveys that sort of can offer some kind of picture as to why these students drop out?
So I've done quite a bit of this kind of survey work with students from the Boston Public Schools over some time. The answers tend to be a little bit evasive and elusive. What students tell you on surveys and even in qualitative interviews is sort of a piecemeal kind of approach, and it's a lot of ex post rationalization. Well, I didn't really want to go to college to begin with. And so you can gradually put together a picture, but it's a challenging picture. The astonishing feature of the research that some of my colleagues are doing in developing countries and other places is that the economic, and I'm an economist, so I tend to gravitate towards these explanations, but I have been very surprised at how much the data is starting to show about the importance of finances and the importance of information. A lot of what I've been finding in my own research is students simply aren't applying to the colleges where they're taking themselves out of the game. They're not applying to colleges at all. They're not applying to reasonable colleges. And interestingly, early on, if you survey students at the beginning of the senior year of high school, anywhere in the country, 90% of the students are going to tell you that they plan to go to a four-year college the next year. In many cases, it's completely unrealistic. But what's interesting about that phenomenon is that we did some surveys in Concord. In Concord, 95% of the students tell you that they're going to go to college, a four-year college the next year, and they do. In Boston, 90% of the students tell you they're going to go to a four-year college the next year, and a much lower, less than half are going to. So it's hard to understand exactly what's going on. But I do think, even without trying to unpack that, I think that what we're going to discover is that if you present students who are qualified with a full range of options and information about how to attain them, you're going to see more of them going to college and more of them succeeding, because all of them will tell you up front that's what they want to do.
Ms. Stone.
Just to add to the anecdotal data, the Brookline has a wonderfully successful program that Dr. Lupini referred to earlier called Steps to Success, and which was focused on college attendance for our lowest income students for a long time, and did successfully, by providing supports, take Brookline from a college going rate of between 30% and 40%, I think, for that public housing population to well above 80%. Now, the interesting thing that's happened when the development of Steps to Success is that along with your research and everybody else's, it became quite clear that getting the kids to college was not enough, that doing something to help them stay in college. And we've learned a lot through STEPS about what it takes to support a student who would not necessarily have had the wherewithal to get into college or to focus on getting into college, what it takes once they're there to support them through that experience. It's culturally difficult, it's academically difficult, it's financially difficult, and there's a lot that certainly can be put into place to support it. So it's, again, just anecdotal from a program that has seemed to work.
And let me just say, I want to apologize. I'm well aware of Steps to Success, and in fact, I should have brought some notes, because or stuck it on my PowerPoint, because that was one of the points I wanted to make on the last slide, is that because of Steps to Success, many of these ideas probably are much less relevant than they would have been otherwise. I also want to comment, to fill this in, the Chicago report I took those slides from is called Potholes on the Road to Success, and they have done very detailed, in a series of research reports, but starting with that one, they've done very detailed case study and survey analysis of exactly the kinds of phenomena that you're mentioning and that others have raised about what are the constraints and the potholes on the way to success.
Right. I just wanted to ask you, I was a little bit confused about the advice that you were talking about promoting public colleges in place, for instance, in New York. What is the goal of promoting the idea of public college over?
The goal would be to get what the problem is that students don't have enough information, and college admissions has become so strategic that students who don't have enough information and aren't savvy about these kinds of new processes, if that's the problem, which I think it is, then goal number one is to provide them with simple strategies, and goal number two is to try to make sure that a simple strategy gives everybody a reasonable, accessible option for college. If you think that the problem is some students are graduating and they get to the middle of the summer and they say, I'm only admitted into this one college, and in fact I don't have the money for it. So my goal in places like New York is to get, if you're qualified, why not you can do lots of other stuff, but apply to a public college, complete the FAFSA, have a reasonable public college option that should be affordable if you've completed the FAFSA, you qualify for the Pell Grant, And you might not decide that's the right thing for you, but at least you're not going to get to the middle of the summer and say, I have no plausible option. So it's a defensive move to say, I'd love to have you find the college that's right for you, that might include a great scholarship to go out of state somewhere to a fabulous private college that we figured out. You've searched 37 colleges, and this happens to be exactly the right one for you, and it's going to come through with money. Short of that, I'm saying, just get at least one thing that's plausible, and maybe you can do better than that.
Thanks.
Ms. Gatto.
I think that the data that you've presented us with is fascinating, and it also points out to me the limitation in certain ways of data, because if you don't have somebody asking the questions, as I know you are, about, well, what does this really mean? And we know in terms of persistence in college that it means doing the kinds of things the Steps to Success is supporting. Now, I'm thinking about a friend. My son was, in his early years, was working, managing a bicycle shop in New York City. And there was a young man he met there who ended up, and he was in a program in the New York City public schools where he was tracked to go to college. He was low income, first generation, etc. And when he got up here, he didn't have any money. Now, there was money for him from the college, but it didn't come until he did a certain kind of thing to get it, and he couldn't get it when he came. So here he was arriving in Boston with no money. Fortunately, he had some friends here. There's a story about a woman named Viola Canolis who went to Harvard. Harvard has a program to give winter coats to people who are poor and can't afford them. But finding out about those programs is very difficult. So it is good to hear that you are finding the data, but the data needs to be taken, needs to go further. The questions need to be asked, and the supports need to be put into place. And it seems to me that the colleges have some responsibility, and we need to be putting pressure on them to make sure that when they take these highly qualified students who happen to be from families who have not gone to college before, who don't have the resources, that they can make sure when they arrive that they don't leave because they are totally unable to cope with what they're facing.
I'll try to respond. I think those are brilliant points, and I'll try to I could talk for a long time, but I'll try to make three very quick comments. The first is I think that you pinpointed a key problem with regard to a lot of assistance programs. We typically find with a variety of assistance programs, and anytime you produce incentive programs for success, the people who take advantage of them are the folks who were going to succeed anyway. So that's the biggest challenge in a lot of programs, and that's what's I think so exciting. One of the things that's so exciting about Steps for Success is that it's making sure that the assistance is going to the people who need it. A second point you mentioned about the requirements for the colleges. The colleges are now well aware that they need to be supporting these students in a way that they have not in the past. Historical anecdote from the 1960s, from the civil rights movement, is that lots of colleges got energized about trying to participate in the civil rights movement with a lot of additional outreach, bringing in students who then didn't do very well. So there is enough of an institutional memory so that the colleges I know that have been ramping up their financial aid programs and their outreach programs have exquisite support systems for students, lots of peer mentoring, among other things, for students from low-income backgrounds when they get to the selective colleges. They're not going to be perfect, and they're not going to solve everybody's problem, but they're working hard at it. I think they are working hard at it. They've gotten that message. A third point that I think is the most important is that when we talk, we're not so naive as to think that data analysis is going to change the world. But we're thinking that data analysis is going to promote the idea of asking some questions that might be insightful, but the questions all have to be about what are our practices that you guys sitting in your offices are never going to know unless you get out to the schools and talk to people and find out what they're doing.
I just want to say thank you, Chris, for coming. I never once met an economist who didn't think data analysis would change the world or solve all the world's problems. So we won't tell your peers that you.
I'm going to out my colleague Dan Levy, who's sitting here, who would tell you the same.
Thank you for coming.
Well, I just want to add thank you very much. I know you've got plenty to do, and to devote some of your professional time to enlightening us is fantastic. And to have you here as part of our community is fantastic, and we couldn't be more grateful.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I hope I wasn't too pedantic and academic.
Not at all. So now we're going to spend some time on the budget, and I just wanted to explain for everybody once again what I hope is going to happen here. Dr. Lupini is going to spend some time with the presentation, and then Mr. Rowe is going to, I suspect, show us some numbers in more detail, and then I'm hoping that the committee itself will be willing to express itself in terms of a variety of opinions, and I'm hoping that those of you who are here who were not planning to make public comments, if you wish to make public comments, will come to our public hearing, which will be next week as part of a school committee program, but we will have a much more open-ended opportunity to hear, and we want to hear, from our constituencies. And so those of you who have some strong feelings, you'll have an opportunity between now and then to think about both what the presentations say and whatever else the school committee says, and then think about it for a while, and I would encourage you to come back next week at the public hearing. Having said that, Dr. Lupini, you're on once again.
Thank you, Mr. Morse. School committee members have a copy of the addendum to my budget message from last week. We've had a couple versions floating around. You may have one that has some slightly dated numbers, but they're off by 1,000 here, 1,000 there, and I'll make sure you have the accurate version, which I have in front of me, and that the accurate version goes up on our website either tonight or tomorrow morning. Let me just say a couple things up front and then walk you through the changes, and unfortunately I don't have major changes to report to you tonight. I think what we all agree on is that this budget's been the most difficult that we've faced in recent memory. I've had, I think, 4 great discussions in open forums with parents over the last week or so, with people, lots of people characterizing that, as well as some ideas around solutions to that, to those issues. But certainly in the 9 years that I've served here as superintendent, this is the most difficult budget that we have faced. We've had to propose some things that we consider to be essential to the heart of this school system. We believe, as I said to the Lawrence community this morning, that we have, with the revenues available to us, and I would underline that part, with the revenues that are available to us, done the best job that we can do in terms of meeting the goals laid out in this school committee's budget directives and in our historic and in the goals that we've laid out historically for this school system. And I hope that there are some conversations here tonight and over the coming weeks about other ideas in terms of increasing those available revenues, because quite frankly, I think other cuts would just present different arrays of problems. So let me report to you that we have managed to find another $321,000 that's available, and again, this document will go up, will be up on our website. Very little of that, unfortunately, is from health insurance, which 2 weeks ago I told you I would report on tonight after the GIC set their rates. You will recall that the rates were set at 5% in our spending plan, and that we thought they would come down from there. Remember, I think each point is worth, I'm looking for Mr. Rowe, about $230,000. Thank you, Mr. Rowe. So we were last year, you'll recall, those rates ended up being 2%. And so we were hoping for something in that neighborhood that would allow us to make some fairly significant restorations. Unfortunately, the rates are set now at an average, and remember, different plans have different rates, but the rates have been set at an average for Brookline employees at 3.5%. The other thing that's occurred in that time period is that the town, mainly the schools, have picked up a number of subscribers to the health insurance plans during the month of December and January. So in those final allocations, both the difference in rate between 5 and 3.5%, and the additional, I think it's 19 on the town, in the town total, I think it's 13 of which are ours. Those subscribers to health insurance had to be factored in, leaving us with this year only an additional $40,000 available to allocate to our budget from a change in health insurance. The other areas that we've been able to create opportunity mainly fall in special education, where Karen Schmuckler has done a fantastic job of looking at service, largely occurring where she was able to look at service demand and staffing and propose a number of reductions. One being in a reduction in a position, our vision specialist position, which saved us an additional $40,000. One in our teacher of the deaf, where she was able to propose a small service demand driven reduction of about $6,000. One in terms of reconfiguring staffing in our in-system program of BCBAs that allowed us to not fill a vacant 0.6 BCBA position, resulting in savings of $30,000. Some changes in contracted services. You'll remember that last year we proposed a change to our model. We brought that model in-house. We still had a number of students who were on services that were provided by outside providers. We believe that based on the way that in-house program has evolved, that we can bring more of the program in-house. In fact, all but very small number of cases in-house, freeing up another $55,000 available to spend. I will say, and we can certainly report to you on this specific issue later on in the spring, but the idea of bringing those services in-house has certainly been, we think, a benefit programmatically to students and certainly a benefit to our budget. We've proposed some changes in the way social skills groups, which largely occur at the Runkle School, will be addressed that will save $20,000. We've proposed bringing a paraprofessional position, which is currently contracted with an outside agency, hiring a Brookline employee for that particular paraprofessional role. That saves us $18,000. And then there are some high school issues which are related. I think I'll talk about high school as a group because it really is a group of trade-offs that Ms. Holman has made after consulting with her staff over the last few weeks around some changes that she wanted to make to her original proposals, which are essentially break even. So I'll talk about those now. So we're recommending, originally you may recall, we proposed eliminating both the Winthrop House and OFC coordinator positions and replacing them with a coordinator of alternative programs. Ms. Holman, after consulting with staff, has decided to leave both of those coordinator roles in place for next year, and instead make some further, by the way, because of that, not fill the lead teacher roles that were proposed in the spending plan. So what we had proposed was a director of alternative programs, lead teachers in 3 programs, and so we cut one coordinator role but added 2 lead teacher roles. What we've done now in this is eliminated those lead teacher roles that were proposed 2 weeks ago and restored this coordinator role. And in its place, we've we've looked at the number of sections at the high school in terms of reduction. This is an effort to take a look at low enrollment sections and make some changes in those. It is aggressive, and I'll comment on that later, I'm sure, as you engage in your discussion. But it is an aggressive plan. I did speak with her today about what some of those would be, and quite frankly, the numbers we had in the budget originally, we thought we could meet fairly easily. I will say it's not all just sections. Some of it will entail looking at, and I've said this to you in past years, and we've done some of it in past years, but it will entail looking at all of the non-classroom roles. All of the non-classroom roles in the building. So there are a number of roles. We gave you one proposal 2 weeks ago specific to the spending plan around the tutorial program and the lead teacher role. And we actually reduced 0.4 of that role. There are a number of roles at the high school where people don't teach even the 4 and have the 5th period as a tutorial. And she is including that in the mix, a number of those in the mix of what can be used to meet that 3.0. And I must say, after that conversation, and as she laid out the number of those that are available for discussion, I was much more confident of their ability to meet some number close to the 3.0 than I had been prior. So that's the high school package, which essentially is a break-even proposition. That leaves us with about $225,000, and what we're recommending here is that all be devoted to the general ed contingency. You'll recall that 2 weeks ago we told you we had not built a general ed contingency, that would be our first restoration, that was our first priority. It is, and it is our recommendation to create a $225,000 package for general education restoration, mainly around the issue of kindergarten, and if our kindergarten numbers or some other numbers in other sections are wrong. But also, as I pointed out to you 2 weeks ago, this contingency is also used more than from time to time to add sections at the high school as we have classes that fill up and we need another section of Spanish 3 or whatever it may be. We've always, in the 9 years I've been here, we've used the contingency fund every year for both of those purposes, additional elementary sections and additional sections at the high school, and that will happen again this year. I want to point out here that the town share of the health insurance savings, because they did not have as many of the new subscribers in December and January, was more in the neighborhood of $133,000. So ours is 36, theirs is 133. I talked in a number of those forums, I talked a few weeks ago here about the issue of sequestration. And there are two main areas that we're worried about in a potential sequestration, or if sequestration does not occur, we could possibly have a federal budget that would be worse in some of the areas that impact us. And the two main areas are special education, where the sequestration scenario that we've been given would cost us $120,000, and in Title I, where the sequestration proposal or numbers that we've seen would cost us $29,000. So we've been looking at 150-ish as the number for sequestration all along. You'll remember from the slide that there were a number of other smaller grants. Those, quite frankly, didn't concern us as much as these two. Because as I pointed out in these forums, while in special education the money goes away, the regulations do not. We still have to provide and most of our money is spent on summer programming and on staff. So what the town has done through the reserve fund is taken their share of health savings, $133,000, and committed that to a sequestration account, contingency account. So that money sits in the reserve fund. It's available to us should sequestration or a federal budget that would require cuts happen. That money would be available to us to fill in the gap on any of our federal grant issues. And we appreciate them doing that. I think it's another example of, as with the money that we get up front in the budget for growth, it's another example of how the town 9 years in a row has provided much more than the 50% specified in the town-school partnership. I will say that in our conversations on Monday at the finance meeting, We talked about a number of issues, of potential strategies for dealing with pieces of this. I've laid out two of those that we spent some time on there. Quite frankly, they've come up in email, they've come up in forums, so it wasn't a surprise to me that we ended up talking about them on Monday because I've heard them out there. The first of those was around the idea that the school committee currently has policy that does not allow for parents or community groups to pay for staff salaries, except where expressly approved by the committee, as in the case of, for example, the 21st Century Fund. We talked about the fact that the committee could vote to allow such an effort to achieve the $200,000 Enrichment and Challenge Support Restoration proposal. And the conversation was that that would have to be done under some conditions, as it is with the 21st Century Fund. In this case, that the monies could be raised on a one-time only basis to provide the school committee time to review the program and look for future revenue supports. Secondly, that the monies are donated to a third party, such as the Brookline Community Fund, which does this for a number of our programs through Steps to Success, and are earmarked for a system-wide program, not an individual school or teacher. And thirdly, that no decisions are made about restoring the program until and unless the full amount needed had been raised. I think I said in that conversation also that we would have to, in order to even consider such an idea, we would have to have a date certain by which we had whatever the amount of money specified were to be. So that was one major conversation at that finance meeting. A second was around the idea of our full-day kindergarten program and the fact that Brookline has had full-day kindergarten for students at no cost for 13 years, but that the law does not require that districts provide more than a half-day option free of charge. There are many districts out there that do charge for full-day kindergarten. As we discussed, the committee could entertain the possibility of charging a fee for families who wish to access the full-day option beginning next September. This would require us to offer a half-day kindergarten option for those not interested in paying for the service, and of course we would establish a scholarship program for those needing financial assistance for the full-day fee. We are not recommending at this point either of these options. Quite frankly, there have been these and some other kinds of ideas discussed. I believe that the best idea is to look across these ideas and see if there are things that can be pieced together. And I look forward to the conversation we're going to have after Mr. Rowe's discussion of the full budget. Are there questions I can answer on the addendum before I turn this over to Mr. Rowe?
Ms. Stone.
Thank you, Dr. Lupini. I just had one clarification. You've suggested $222,000 for the general education contingency. What is our typical general education contingency?
200.
Okay. So that is we're not undercutting it because
we're not undercutting it, and in fact, you know, I think if anything, what I spelled out a few weeks ago is that our if there's one that's lower than normal, it's our special education. I think I was asked the question by someone, why do you continue to refer to both a $250,000 special ed contingency and the reserves? And the reason is that special ed contingency is not in the same range that it has been in some years. So the general ed, this has brought it into line with where we've normally been. Special education, I think we're normally in the 400 range in most of our budgets if I went back through my messages, and we're not this year. But we believe in combination all those funds provide us with the contingencies we need.
Dr. Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just querying about the public funding, public fundraising effort for ECS. What would be the components of those costs that we would be looking to replace, or is that for a later decision? But I mean, what I'm asking about is all the benefit costs and the OPEBs as well as the salaries.
So when we refer to a figure here and in the original message, those figures are merely the salary figures. So though they don't go beyond that number. The 264 that's been reduced, the 201 in restoration packages, does not refer to OPEBs, does not refer to health insurance costs. It refers to salary costs alone.
Ms. Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to remind the committee and also have you clarify that our post-budget expenses associated with enrollment last year exceeded $700,000. So even if the general ed contingency from last year was, what was our contingency last year? It was 200.
General ed was 200.
But the unforeseen increase in enrollment and expenses associated with that required us to take action in 13 that exceeded that contingency fund by a lot.
That's correct, and that's why we had a freeze, and that's why we're now talking in one part of the budget about freeze restoration. That is absolutely correct.
Ms. Cotto.
I can't remember the exact numbers in the restoration for ECS, but most of the teachers working in ECS are working less than 0.5. Is
Right.
that not correct? And that means that there are no health care costs or pension costs?
I don't have the exact fee. Let me say it this way, because this is the best way we can say it without those exact numbers in front of us. That more so than in some programs, we would have people under the 0.5, which would qualify for health insurance. So if you're comparing apples to apples, if we were talking this versus something else in that same range, you'd have less health insurance costs on this topic.
Right, but
Yes.
we don't have to worry about those health insurance costs. When the question was asked, it seemed as if the implication was there would be costs beyond
Well, there are some.
the salary. There will be some,
Sure,
but it would be
it's not
less.
as great as it would be in some other areas. That's correct.
So I have a question to follow up, I think, on Ms. Kershaw, who asked, I think, was it you, Ms. Kershaw, who asked about last year, what happened last, we yeah.
And by last year, we mean the year that we're currently in.
Yeah,
Yes.
sorry.
Okay.
You're right.
That's okay.
So my question was somewhat to give everybody context. Are there other circumstances within your time here in which we have also faced enrollment growths which have caused us to have to overexpend our contingencies?
No, that's actually never happened, Mr. Warren. Yeah, of course it has. Yes, I mean, it's happened on a number of occasions. There are two situations where we were not able to freeze our way out of budget issues and had to go for reserve fund transfers. Yes.
So the only reason I asked that question for the public was that sometimes contingencies are seen to be slush funds or whatever you want to call them.
Those are your words.
Yes, I understand that. And I wanted to make sure that everybody understood that those contingencies are serious business, and they have not always been adequate.
Well, there's certainly serious business in the situations we find ourselves in now with the growth that we have. I mean, I'll just repeat this for the committee again. And a number of you have been at forums the last couple of weeks, and so you've heard me say this probably too many times. Our best projections right now say this is a kindergarten class of 600. It's not an exact science. And there's weirdness, I think is the technical term I've been using. There's weirdness in this set of kindergarten numbers that I've not seen in the other years. And what I mean by that is there are schools where the number is very large. There's one in particular where the number is very, very large. And there are some where the number is exceptionally small. And quite frankly, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Because I don't believe those schools are going to come in with a kindergarten number that's only going to warrant 2 sections. We haven't had 2-section kindergartens at any school in quite some time. And a 600 doesn't lead to 2 sections at school X. Yet that's how the numbers are trending right now. So I believe there's some noise that's going to come more in June and July, and I think we have to create contingencies for that. I hope I'm wrong.
Thank you. That's the point I wanted to make. Mr. Rowe, I think if you wanted to put the numbers on this, that would be great, and then afterwards, I look forward to a discussion.
Are we here? There we go. Thank you. Yeah, I just want to begin by saying a word about contingencies. Remember, it's March, as it says right here, March 14th. We're preparing a budget for a school year that begins in 3.5 months. Well, actually, for a fiscal year that begins in 3.5 months and a school year that begins in 5.5 months. So what we're working with is available data. And as you see on an 83 plus or minus $1 million budget, and we're talking about a contingency fund of a couple $100,000. That's not a lot of wiggle room when you have the incomplete set of information that we really have, especially on this issue of kindergarten enrollment. I mean, and it's true really of all of our enrollment. So if you look at what's happened to us over the last few years, and we've seen certainly some fluctuation. But to Ms. Kershaw's point, we were fortunate at the end of last year that we received a supplementary appropriation that was actually part of the governor's budget. And we'll see some of the numbers here on Chapter 70 that actually brought us a $400,000, $422,000 appropriation that we got late in the spring that allowed us to fund that $700,000 worth of service. But we found ourselves this year at the end of the first quarter looking down the barrel of a $400,000 deficit, and so we had to take some action to freeze. So you know, we're working with incomplete information, and so that's really much of what this is about. I wanted to just begin by taking us back to a slide that Ms. Kershaw may recognize that's actually stolen from her presentation from December, which is the school committee's budget guidelines that gave us the direction on what we should be thinking about as we build this budget. And it really has to do with, I'm not going to read it all, but you know, being as transparent in the presentation of the management and the development of this as we possibly can be. Minimum reliance on one-time revenues. We have had some practice in the past of some bad behavior around that from time to time. Last year, meaning for the current year, we were able to move that number down, but it's very important that we try to build a budget that's based on recurring revenue, because much of what we do is based on staff services, and when you're funding staff, you have to make sure that you can afford them from year to year. Look to achieve savings and efficiencies wherever possible, and that's obviously something that well, I say it's obvious. It's something that we continuously do try to do. Prioritizing innovations and strategies for dealing with both the achievement gap as well as making sure that we have appropriate challenges for students in all levels academically. The continued focus on prioritizing small class sizes, on low student-teacher ratios, especially at the elementary level, where we've struggled, in fact, at the lower grades, when we look at the data over the last few years, because that's where we've had the most significant increase in enrollment. Maintaining a commitment to METCO and the materials fee program. Both of those, we believe, bring a lot of value to the school system in terms of the METCO program, really bringing in a population of students that we believe adds a lot to the fabric of what we do, as well as the quality of the staff that we can recruit through the materials fee program. And finally, maintaining solvency in our revolving funds, which we have a couple of very large ones, so it's important that we strive to do that. I want to just start by talking a little bit at a higher level, 10,000 feet, let's say, about, first of all, the town budget. So if we look at the town budget growth for this year, what we'll see is total revenues growing just over $6 million. And when we look at the school department as a component of the town's budget, we see that our allocation is $3.4 million. So it's a significant share of the growth, and that's actually without our benefits costs allocated. So that when you look at the pie of how the town's operating budget is divided up, education gets 54.6%. So we really get a significant piece of that. We talk about the a partnership that we have with the town, and we do. We talk about dividing resources approximately 50-50. In fact, we have been favored as we've seen significant growth over the last few years compared to some of the other town departments where, if you will, their service population has been much more stable. So that if we take that allocation from the town, the one on the prior slide was before the 40,000 that the superintendent just mentioned that came in from the adjustment from health insurance. But so that the town appropriation grew 3.5 million. We have additionally been able to bring some more revenue to the table, partly through an increase in our materials fee. We've had an adjustment here that relates to bringing in revenue for having the food service program pay for the health insurance of its own employees, and actually the revenue is reflected in this new number up above here. So and as well as some other adjustments, moving some money from one-time money to help with a technology initiative at the high school. So our total revenue growth is 3.5 million, but we see that against total cost pressure of 5.1 million. And so what really frames the issue is that even with 4.2% growth in our revenue for this year, what we have is a significant hill to climb in terms of putting a budget together against 5.1 million. I want to talk a little bit about state aid, because when you go back to this slide, which shows the sources of the town's revenue, what you see is that state aid does provide $16.8 million, of which which was $1.7 million in growth. If I can just pause for a second. And what I meant to say earlier, when you look at the total revenue available to the town, you notice most of it comes from the property tax. That's true in all communities. Municipal services are generally funded from local sources, and the major local source is the property tax. And so Brookline's growth this year in the property tax, which is the major area where revenue comes from to support our budget, is 5.4 million of that 6.1 net. But there are other areas, and state aid grew by $1.7 million. The reason it grew is because of Chapter 78. Chapter 78 is the name of education aid that comes through the state budget. And Brookline in the last 2 years has actually received some significant growth, certainly compared to the prior years before that. And even when you go back historically, the growth that we've had in the last 2 years is really greater than anything since education reform in 1993. And the reason for this is because of a change in the law in 2007 that went to a new formula for calculating Chapter 78. If you go back to 1993, the idea of growing funds at the state level was to send revenue to the poorest communities and to the neediest communities. But, and so Brookline didn't benefit from that because we qualify under the definition of a wealthy community. But in the last couple of years, the idea of putting together a base that would fund up to 17.5% of our foundation budget, we found ourselves in a position where we've actually been advantaged by that formula. And so without going into the full details of this number, what the state does is they calculate a foundation budget. You notice that Brookline's foundation budget is $67 million. And what that has allowed to happen in the last 2 years is for a calculation of significant growth to the Chapter 70 funding that's projected to come to us. The projection in the governor's budget for this year is actually $2.7 million. The problem is that it's dependent on significant growth in the income tax and other adjustments to taxes statewide that, from a political standpoint, appear to be unrealistic. So in terms of estimating what we should put aside in terms of our projection, working with the town, that number has been reduced to $1.7 million. And that looks to be more realistic. It's actually in line with the growth that happened a year ago. And it's more likely to be the outcome of the final state budget. The other piece that I didn't say in putting a budget together this time of year is we know we're preceding the state budget by some significant period of time. We're not preceding the governor's budget, but the governor's budget has a long time before it finally comes out of the legislature with exactly what funding is going to look like in the final resolution. So we're assuming $1.7 million in state revenue to support the town and schools, and half of that revenue comes to the school department. Another big piece of cost pressure that we've been struggling with over the last decade plus is the question of health insurance. And what you may recall that in fiscal 11, the town entered the Group Insurance Commission. And as a result of that move, which happened working closely with our employee groups, was we were able to bring down the total cost of health insurance to the town and to the employees, based on different plans that, if you will, share the risk in terms of employee choices and different opportunities for, rather than pure premium plans and indemnity plans. And so what we see is that through the current year, health insurance was actually below the peak it had achieved in 2010. FY14 is projected to be just slightly higher. This chart actually was made when the projection was still at 5%, and as the superintendent said, it's come in at 3.6%. Much of the savings in that actually went back to our appropriation for health insurance because of the growth we'd seen in the membership. But the 40%, the $40,000 that came to us was a result of this change in the percentage. So that's the trend in terms of total cost. We're school department has more than half of this, almost $25 million total cost of health insurance. And then if we look at employee costs, what we see is that the actual premium costs have been reduced for employees, so that the move to the Group Insurance Commission has actually been a positive in terms of the town being able to try to stabilize health insurance costs. In total, we pay 83% of employees' premium, and while every employee's participation is obviously different, and different plans have different out-of-pocket costs, the actual premium share has been lower. One thing that we are worried as we look forward is that we may come out of the trough. The last couple of years, health insurance cost in particular has been more stable than it was in prior years, and the question is, will the Group Insurance Commission be able to continue to manage that? So that for 14, total cost of benefit growth for the schools is just under $1.3 million. That number is separate from our appropriation growth, so that if you take the $3.5 million that goes to our appropriation, along with the benefits growth, that's really $4.8 million, really pushing $5 million in terms of the total resources available to us for this year. And our total benefits cost is just over $20 million. That's outside of our appropriations carried in the town budget, but it's a significant piece of cost. So go back to this slide, which shows the incremental changes for this year. Incremental growth in revenue, $3.5 million. Incremental pressure on spending, $5.1 million in our initial analysis, which required us to make reductions of just over $1.5 million. And as we go through the detail, I just want to show you, if you look at the summary of where our final staffing, our recommended staffing in this particular budget is, what you'll see is for the current year, we have 1,008 staff on the general fund. For the budget we're proposing for next year, we have 1,014 staff on the general fund, approximately growth of 6. And if you look at the various categories, administration, teaching, school-based support, aides and technicians, school administration, clerical, and custodial, you see that the growth is primarily in our aides and technicians category. So it really is from classroom aides, where central administrative staff remains the same. Teaching positions are down across the system by 2 in the general fund. You notice that's also 2 in all funds. Our school-based support is up just slightly over a position. Our aides and technicians are up approximately 6 positions. School-based administration is the same. Clerical is up 0.8. And custodial food service are flat. And generally speaking, our external funds numbers are approximately the same. You notice we're down about a 0.3 position total. And if you look across our staffing, 564 teachers, Support staff, these are defined in this analysis. These are our classroom teachers, including math, literacy specialists, et cetera. Our support staff would be defined as our out-of-classroom professionals, nurses, guidance counselors, social workers, librarians, et cetera. So professional equivalents, if you will, of teachers, but in other roles. Aides, technicians, primarily those are classroom aides, but there are some technical staff that we have in our various departments. Principals and administration, this is school-based administration, principals, vice principals at the high school, deans. Our clerical staff, food service staff, and central administration. So for a total of, recommended in this budget, 1,014. I'm going to now just go through the particulars of the revenue growth. I think the most important piece to focus on is that it's growth of $3.5 million, primarily driven by the partnership number, which is the number that comes from the town appropriation, although we were able to make some adjustments that brought us an additional $50,000. The major pressures on the budget, really these two together, which are approximately $3 million for our step, actually these are labeled wrong. The $2.3 million is our collective bargaining, funding our collective bargaining agreements for next year, and the step increases net of retirement at $750 is for paying for step increases for staff. But together those two are just over $3 million, and that's really where the most significant pressure on the budget comes from. Additionally, though, you see that we're recommending just under $300,000 of what we've categorized here as program improvements. I'll get to the details in a moment. A little over $500,000 of special education enhancements, $682,000 of enrollment growth, $177,000 for dealing with the restoration from excuse me, this year's budget freeze, as well as a grant contingency. And then finally, $425,000 for contingency or other issues that we've had to deal with. One of the things that we're in the next year, FY14, will be the third year of our most of our collective bargaining agreements. We're in a mode where we're unfortunately dealing with the third year of 3 years that was, if you will, back-end loaded. We faced very difficult budget times 2 years ago, and most of our collective bargaining agreements had a 0 in the first year, and so we structured our agreements under the premise that we would strive to find the revenue to fund in the third year, and so we're partly paying the price for that. So that's, I think, something that we need to keep in the context of putting a budget together, and as we move forward, something that we always need to be mindful of. You can't borrow too far from the future, but sometimes you have to make choices, and it's appropriate sometimes to structure agreements in a way that may save you in year one, but you have to pay for it down the road. So that's a factor in this year's budget. So the program improvements, just to go quickly, include expansion of our literacy specialist program, technical assistant at the high school in our performing arts program, $140,000 for additional contracts, supplies, and materials, mainly in our teaching learning program for direct services for students, and $50,000 for technology access. This is actually the money that I mentioned earlier that we took out of a one-time account to allow for a program that will resemble something like a one-on-one, allowing students who can't on their own have technology for us to work a program that will allow for it. In special education, also defined here under program improvements, a new language-based learning disabilities program at Brookline High School that will cost us $165,000. Team facilitator expansion also at the high school that will cost us $126,000. An inclusion facilitator position at one of our elementary schools, 2 additional aid positions at the high school to support students that have needs, expansion to our nursing program, a transition and inclusion facilitator support. This will be aid position at the high school. And finally, supplies, materials, and contracts within special education department or student services department for a broad array of needs that we've identified to support the staff and the programs that exist or that will become new in those areas. expansion for elementary growth. You'll see where we backed off on some of this in a later slide in terms of our reductions, but initially, based on 660 students, incoming kindergarten students, we were projecting 8.2 additions at the elementary level, including 8.2, including 2 first-grade paraprofessionals, because as we have our current kindergartens move to the first grade, we want to continue the model of a full-time aide in each first-grade class. And in addition to the classroom teachers at the elementary level, we need to add to our specialist teachers. So this allows us to fully staff the growth at the elementary level for next year. We're providing $103,000 to restore 4 positions that we actually froze this year. 2 were classroom aides. One was a dean's position at the high school, and one was a clerical position to support, I think it was our science and our performing arts program. Additionally, we're absorbing from the 21st Century Fund services under what's called the advisory program at Brookline High School, which includes both a staff member, part-time, and stipends for teachers who work in that program. And the Steps to Success program, which this past year had supplemental funding from the Housing Authority. Some of that money is being reduced, and so we're picking that up so that we can continue forward with the full staffing of Steps to Success. In terms of contingency or other areas, we're bringing on board a new, with the town, and a fully rolled out personnel human resource management system. And in our case, it's really to deal with significant reporting issues that we now have with the Department of Education. We need to make sure that we have the appropriate staff in our human resource office to both manage the requirements of our software as well as do the reporting that we're required to do to the state, and then today's Students to Morse Teachers, which is a program also in human resources to help recruit and identify students who have an interest in being teachers, especially minority students, exclusively minority students, who have an interest in being teachers, and make sure that we have a program that will support them. Fee processing clerk is actually is based on a self-funding premise. We're going to create the position to manage centrally a number of areas where we charge fees, our early childhood programs, our summer school program, our camps, those kinds of programs, under the theory that we'll get both more consistency as well as more continuity and more accountability from having this central management, and utilize the increased revenue to actually pay for the position. We're also adding to our transportation budget for the services that were provided. This is primarily a special education cost. It's primarily services for special education students, many of whom are door-to-door and or from town to out-of-district placements. But that, in any event, that cost is rising for next year. We have some cost growth in our contracted custodial services. We use contracts to supplement at 7 of our schools our in-house staff, and our contract has an increase for next year. And then finally, the $225,000 the superintendent noted as our general fund contingency. So those together make up a $5.1 million package against the $3.5 million of revenue. And so the package that we've looked at for reductions is a $1.5 million package, including at the elementary level the Enrichment and Challenge Support Program, of which you heard much discussion this evening. Performing arts reduction, 4.6 staff. These two programs actually are just about the same in terms of total FTE and budget savings. 1 math specialist position and a math tutor position at one of our elementary schools. At the high school, the reductions are 3.4 FTEs, which are primarily, as the superintendent said earlier, high school sections, which will require us to both have tighter offerings and probably some increase in the class sizes. A 0.6 reduction related to the consolidation of the performing arts coordinator position. Currently, we have a position at both the high school and the elementary schools. and we'll have one combined position for next year. Additionally, we're cutting a support services position at the high school and increasing the athletic fee by $100 per student per sport, which we expect to raise $100,000 for next year, which will allow us to transfer costs that we currently carry on the general fund to the revolving fund for athletics. And so that will save us $100,000. Two areas of restructuring, we're switching some costs that we currently charge to some federal grants where the state, Massachusetts Teacher Retirement System, charges us 9% for each employee. By swapping some employees from the grant, we don't have to pay that charge, and so we actually free up $98,000. We're using that as a budget savings for this year. Additionally, we worked with the town in the capital budget, the capital improvement program, to pick up, it's actually $175,000 that they're setting aside for technology improvements. We're able to reduce spending in the general fund by $95,000 of that, and then an additional $80,000 we're going to use for two technology initiatives, one at the high school to allow us to fully outfit the language, sorry, what's the LLD? Yeah, LLD, right, the LLD program that I mentioned earlier. And the other two allow us to fully roll out the evaluation program, teacher evaluation program that allows both the software and the hardware for administrators. Consolidations, this is where, in terms of projections for next year, we've used the enrollments that we've seen from kindergarten year to date, or month to date really, because it began in February, to back down what was a projection initially for next year of 660 kindergartners to 600. We have 666 kindergartners today. That was a record high. We have had 600 in the past. The number appears to be tracking where we were 2 years ago. And so we use this as an opportunity to actually reduce our provision by 3 teaching positions and 3 aide positions, as well as make some modifications in student services, take the consolidation of 1 other classroom we haven't identified yet, but we are looking at a number of situations and believing that what we'll see is turnover or enough opportunity to consolidate 1 section. Probably it'll be at a large school where we have 4 or 5 sections. Generally, these don't happen at the smaller schools with 2 or 3 sections. And then finally, savings under student services contracts. So that's really the package of budget recommendations that we've been able to put together to balance this. So that what you see is a significant group of cost pressures that have required us to look into programs and areas where we would normally look to avoid making reductions. And so that's what the package that we have in front of you today is.
Let me just make one other comment, because my terrific staff has the answer to the question that was posed earlier. I don't, I'll try to stay away from, keep this at 30,000 feet if I can. So we talk about positions that are health insurance eligible. So that's what I'm talking in terms of. So I was actually wrong. 5 of the 7 positions in that program that were asked about earlier are health insurance eligible. 5 of the 7 are eligible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. For everybody in the audience, there'll be a written quiz on this on Monday. What I'd like to do first is to ask if there are any specific questions on the numbers, and then I would like to ask for people to express their own opinions about whatever they want to regarding the budget. So let's start with just the numbers. People have a question regarding the numbers. Ms. Chalupsky?
Yes, I may be a little dense. The $682,000 for enrollment.
Yeah.
That's an expenditure for, or what is that?
That's the number that was back here. It was 8 point, right here. This 682.
So these are additional.
These are additional classrooms. We originally, when we said we expected 660 kindergartners.
Right,
that-
okay.
okay.
All right, now I understand.
We looked at both the growth in kindergartners. This year we have 32 sections. Well, next year we'll have 32 sections. Where's the growth? Well, the growth is that every group moves up a grade, and we have 22 sections at the 8th grade,
Right.
and we have 32 sections coming in at the low end, right? So you would think we actually were going to grow 10 staff. Well, it turns out that we, due to some issues we had both at Lincoln where we're going to consolidate going into the 8th grade, situation at Driscoll School where a position, because of the 7th and 8th grade staffing was there, we felt we only needed 8 people too. Well, then as we got better information and moved on and said, somewhere, that, yeah, I know, I'm the wrong one, and said that we're going to only have 600 students. We went back and said we could reduce 3 of those teaching positions and 3 of those aid, is it 3? No, 2 of those aid positions. Okay? Because we expect that we'll have, oh no, it's 3 aid, yeah, 3 aid positions, and each aid is a .8, is a .84. So we cut out 3 aides and 3 teaching positions out of our projection, okay, which saved us that 234. Okay, so, whoops. So this is where the 600 number is.
It's right there.
Right there. That's the gross. The reduction is over here, in the, it's in here. So we didn't list these net. And the reason we did it this way is because, for those watching, the budget process, we had a set of assumptions at one point, then we made some modifications later on. So we didn't just show you the net, we decided to show you the steps in the process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I mean, so that's part of what does happen, and the reason we think we need a contingency is because could that 600 number go back to 620? Could.
But we have
It could come in at 580, which would be helpful.
Included in this budget, there is a $225,000
Yes.
contingency.
Yes.
Thank you.
And that's
Ms. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Peter, for this, as usual, incredibly comprehensive presentation. I just had 2 questions to clarify. On the state aid chart, I was wondering whether that money is in adjusted dollars or constant dollars. Yeah.
That's right.
I believe it's in constant dollars.
Constant dollars. So in fact, the revenues there are just dramatically lower than, I mean, if they were real dollars, we wouldn't be seeing them at the same level as in 1993.
Right, this would be inflation adjusted downward, so the stack wouldn't be as high, right?
Right.
But I think you'd find that the pattern would be significant. Not quite as dramatic, but still significant, because in fact, we lost Chapter 70 funding in these 4 years. Remember back when the state was really struggling in terms of its budget. And the same pattern happened in the 03-04 time. So it was in the 90s after education reform was in 1993. And there was really a good run during that period where the economy was strong and where the state was able to fund education reform to the foundation budget commitments that were actually originally made.
Right.
Or originally hoped to be made. But then we faced 2 tough economic times in 03 and 04 is where we see it here. It started in 02. And then again in 9, 10, and 11. So some of this was patched by federal money. Remember the ARRA funding?
Yep.
But this is still the matter of what happened. And this FY13, the current year, is the first year actually that the governor was able to add to Chapter 70 funding total statewide for in these years 17.5 formula number to kick in. And so that led to us getting additional revenue. One other thing to point out, and it's never relevant in conversations in Brookline, but if you were in a lot of communities in Massachusetts, you'd find that the school system was struggling with the town to get the money to fund the foundation budget, because the formula that the state calculates. What you notice from our numbers is that we're in the, we have a foundation budget of, oops, thanks. Oh, I must have just broken, yeah, sorry about that. We have a foundation budget of 67 million, but we're actually spending 85 million. In other words, the town gives significantly more resources to the school system in Brookline than the state requires per its formulas. In many communities, that's not true. The school systems struggle to stay above formula, and the state actually, in many cases, has to give additional money just to get school systems up to what's called foundation. Communities such as Brookline, where there's a local commitment to fund schools, don't face that issue. And in the last few years, we were also in a position where we also didn't get additional state funding other than what they call per pupil, which is sometimes money that they would give based on the number of students enrolled.
Right. I appreciate that clarification. My point was more about the value of the dollars that we're getting relative to the value of the services that we get per dollar and the change between 1993 and 2013. So if the foundation formula is not adjusted for inflation over that time, whereas our costs and the amount that we get out of our revenues is adjusted to inflation, so that in fact what we're getting is far lower than our costs in terms of absolute dollars.
Sure, if this were just a steady bar, you're right, it would be inflation eaten away over time. The point of this was more to show that there have actually been dramatic differences, and they tend to match economic cycles. And your point is also legitimate, which is, today's dollars are not worth what 20 years ago were.
And I just had a quick question, probably for Dr. Lupini. The $50,000 in technology access funds, I'm just curious about whether or not we are coordinating with Steps to Success, which also has a funded technology access project and is probably looking at similar issues.
Yeah, it's not as much so. The answer is yes.
Okay.
The answer is whatever funding they have available,
we're essentially
we'll bring to this, and also work with them closely to identify students who need technology made available to them in order to meet the work that they're being asked to do at the high school. Yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If there are no other questions on Mr. Rowe's presentation, I'd like now to ask the school committee individually to express whatever opinions they want to express about what has been said or in the budget or what has been suggested. Please. Mr. Chang.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Peter, as always, thorough analysis, and I really appreciate the details. The first thing I want to say is, again, I want to thank Bill, Peter, and his team in terms of going through this very difficult process that we're facing right now in terms of our budget for fiscal 14. And the work they have done in terms of finding savings and consolidations that helps us in terms of closing this gap. But I think the simple fact of the matter is that we need revenues, as simple as that. We have had tremendous growth in terms of enrollment. We have obligations to our collective bargaining that we must honor. And we as citizens of Brookline, and like a lot of you guys, we moved to Brookline because what Brookline stands for, the kind of education to provide, the differentiation, the customization. And it would be a tragedy that we have to take a very productive program away, and really to the detriment of, of students. And what I don't like to see either is that we restore ECS at the cost of another program. That's not fair. So, and also in addition, I think the budget that we're proposing here right now has very, very little flex left in it. Anything that happens that's not in our control, and frankly, that could be enrollment, that could be out-of-district placement that we don't know about, that shows up on our doorsteps, that will completely throw this budget for a loop, and we'll be back to square one. So, in my mind, I would like this committee to seriously consider, and I'm advocating, that we need to consider all revenue sources as a stopgap measure before we find a long-term solution to our problems. Thank you.
I'll go any way I can.
I've been really struck by the substance and the thoughtfulness of the letters that we've been getting on this budget, both about principally about the value of the ECS program, which clearly I didn't think of myself as being an older parent in this system, but the ECS program has clearly benefited from the program review that was just being done when I joined the school committee, because the description of the program that I've been hearing from parents is very different from the program that existed when my kids were in early elementary school. So, and I agree and find quite compelling that that in that description are embedded really fundamental values of this system about how we approach education and how we approach helping all learners. So I've been quite affected by those letters and really appreciate the care that's gone into all of them. And I agree with Mr. Chang that that this boils down to revenues. There aren't other cuts we can make, and whereas I'm usually feeling like sometimes you just have to make incredibly difficult cuts. That's what this is about. Certainly in the short term, in the long term, the idea of raising revenues through overrides or anything else is a very long-term prospect. We can't count on being able to do that at any point, and certainly if people are thinking of that as a solution, it is a solution that is at least 2 years away, given the process that's necessary for any kind of override. So we're looking at the options that Dr. Lupini put out here. I have questions about how those would be implemented. I thought the conditions that we discussed at Finance and that you laid out tonight about private contributions, I think ought to be explored. But with those conditions, it makes it more difficult for that to completely solve our problem. I am very, very ambivalent about the idea of charging for the full-day kindergarten and would certainly want to see it only again as a stopgap solution. But I think administering it is also very, very difficult. We've got hundreds of families that have already signed up for next year's kindergarten on one assumption. And that assumption is full day, and that assumption is full day without a charge. And so I worry greatly about what it means to implement this as quickly as we would have to solve our fiscal 14 budget problems. With that as the driver, on the other hand, I also agree that everything has to be on the table. And finally, I would just ask the question about consolidations. I know we are looking with fingers crossed towards that one consolidation that you mentioned, but I wonder what it would take in terms of class sizes to get us more consolidations, and how many consolidations we would have to make in order to get to to the revenue number that we need in the next fiscal year.
So I'm going to let Dr. Lupini respond to a good and legitimate question.
That would be great.
And we'll do that as we go along when either he or I think it's appropriate. Thank you.
So, so there are two answers to that question. I promised Mr. Rowe I would give his, and his answer is it's very difficult to go beyond the one. In fact, it was very difficult to include one in a budget because it simply doesn't work. Yeah, it's very, very difficult. Each consolidation we've made, particularly since the growth has started to occur, has been very painful and depended upon a certain set of conditions occurring at a building. I mean, as I said at Lawrence this morning, it would mean 4 or 5 consolidations. It would mean that we'd have to identify them, and we identified, I told you in the budget message, we identified 5 from which we thought we could find 1. I think that's actually going to be difficult, but I think we can do it. I think beyond that, you're forcing a set of conditions that are going to cause 28s to 30s in classes somewhere in the range between 3rd grade and 5th. Okay? And so my take on it is that unlike the things that I was willing to build into the message for discussion, it's not a bridge strategy. Those are bridge strategies. Pieces of those, or those in their entirety, are bridge strategies, and this is not. It's a start down a road to away from a set of conditions that we've laid out. We've said one of our priorities is to keep those numbers reasonable in classrooms. We've been able to do that. I've been able to stand in front of groups and say, even with all of our groups, even with all of our growth, we're up an average of 1 student per class across the elementary schools on average over this period of growth. And I think that's a very important consideration, and I wouldn't want to see us give that one up because the research says it creates all kinds of other issues in terms of special education referrals, et cetera. So, there's my answer, which is it's really not a bridge to anywhere, unlike some of these other strategies. Or you can take Mr. Rowe's, which is it simply doesn't work. They're both good answers as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, other comments or?
Some things, actually.
Yes, sir.
So I probably have very little to meaningfully add to the conversation about the budget, but one thing that I did want to raise is that as we're going forward and looking at budget cuts, to make sure that budget cuts aren't unfairly affecting the less advantaged and lower achieving students at the high school. And that was something I was really worried about, a trend that might happen with the proposed cuts to OFC and Winthrop House. It seems to me that while obviously all budget cuts are going to be very damaging to the high school, that budget cuts to our less advantaged students are going to be particularly detrimental because those students are the least equipped to deal with those losses and resources and are going to be the most affected by those losses. Obviously there's no good place to make the budget cut, but it occurs to me at least that our higher achieving students might be less affected by some of those losses.
Ms. Kershaw, did you? Oh, you didn't want to. Okay. Ms. Gatto.
I want to talk also about cost, but I want to talk about a different kind of cost. And as I say this, I also want to say that I have no idea what the answer is, and I'm willing to consider almost anything to get us out of this predicament. The cost that I'd like us to think about is the cost, first of all, and I'm going to start with the teachers. I think back to when I was teaching. My classes were in the 20 to 25 range. I had a full year intern. I retired in 2006, so we're not talking about too long ago. I had a full-time intern every year. There were only 2 6th grades at Driscoll, so we could group. We had a special ed teacher who spent a lot of time with us, both in the classroom and working individually with kids. There was an ECS teacher who came in. There was a lot of support. Often there was an aide as well with somebody or other. And I looked at the situation today. The class sizes are larger. I think the consolidation idea is one of the worst ideas I've heard in a long time, because when you add another child to a class, what you do is make that teacher's life more stressful, and the education that that teacher can offer those kids declines. When you get your classes large enough, and when I started teaching, I had classes over 40. I had classes in the 30s. I was in Baltimore County in Maryland. We had huge classes. You don't teach the same way. You can't. You can't do it. You can't individualize. You can't differentiate in the way you need to do. So you need to think about that when you start talking about raising class size. So we're also talking about cutting the ECS teacher. Now, the ECS teachers are one of those support people who a lot of people don't even know exist. But in fact, the classroom teachers know they exist, because those ECS people are, number one, helping them differentiate. And everybody thinks, oh, ECS, it's the top-end kids, that's who they're helping. They are helping everybody. I have heard about ECS teachers who are coming in, working with the teachers, for example, in their math program, thinking about problems that would be of interest to all of the kids. They are making problems that would be of interest to the top-level kids, and they're also then saying, but look, this is how we could do it with the kids who are having more difficulty. ECS teachers come into the classroom in all kinds of subjects. In social studies, one ECS teacher I know recently had 2 big floor maps. One of them was China, and one was the U.S. The children were comparing the population of of China and the U.S., and they were talking about ratio in first grade. The children who represented the Chinese, clearly there were more of them. The children could see that there was a comparison there. They then thought about, okay, if you lived in China, how many TV sets would there be? So they added little TV sets. How many TV sets would there be in the U.S.? They added that. How many cars? How many bicycles? We are talking about first graders, but first graders are learning about culture. They're learning that probably in China there are a lot more bicycles per person, or not per person, but in the population than the U.S. They're learning about math. They're learning about working together to do activities. You don't do this kind of lesson, number one, in a large class, because you can't do it. And secondly, when you have the support of good ECS teachers coming in to help you, that's another resource you can draw on. Our teachers in Brookline right now are very, very stressed, I think, because classes are slightly larger. Differentiation gets harder every year because the range of students seems to increase. I hear, from the time I was teaching, I'm hearing about more children who have special needs coming into the classroom. That's fine, that is as it should be, but it takes a certain amount of support. When you begin to stretch teachers this way, it's the effect that it has on the students that concern me. I'm concerned about the effect on the teachers, but they're adults. But students are learning. Students are grasping everything they can to learn about their world. Teachers can't provide that when they don't have adequate support. And it seems to me that it is crucial that we keep our ECS teachers in place so that our students will benefit. All of our students, every single one in that classroom will benefit from having an ECS teacher who is helping that teacher differentiate and who is sparking their curiosity. I think that, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but you could all verify this too with your own stories about what the ECS teacher is doing. So I am very, very loath to cut those positions. I am very loath to go with consolidations. Do I have an answer? I don't know, but I think there has to be one, and I am willing to consider almost anything we can do that doesn't damage the education of the children and put more stress on our teachers.
Dr. Warren, did I miss you?
No, you didn't miss me. I was not prepared. I certainly agree with you, Barbara, that there is a strategic value to having the ECS teacher, and that the ECS teacher does provide an incredibly useful capacity in the part of the classroom teacher to differentiate instruction, and it's well within the sort of the metes and bounds of Brookline's thinking about itself that it provides that kind of service. I also think that the early childhood education provided by full-day kindergarten is a wonderful improvement in early childhood, and it's something that is really necessary or has been necessary, had been considered essential to improve educational outcomes across the spectrum of, especially of social economic status kids in the system. I'm also concerned that the prospect of consolidations benefiting the budget may be illusory. And I think, when Peter was talking about contingencies are important, I think our thinking about contingencies, we were already operating so close to the margin of available space and other resources. When we punch through that particular level, I think there's a prospect of inordinate increases in costs that are potential, and so I agree that those contingencies are necessary there. I'm sure that Bill and Peter and other people in the system believe that those contingencies are potentially not adequate to the level of risk that we have here. That is to say, I think it is entirely possible, just from a empirical way of looking at it, that there may not be an answer to cutting ECS. As bad as it appears, it may be one of our better options. I mean, if we were to choose between keeping a class size of 21 or 22 and not having ECS versus having a class size of 25 or 28, and keeping ECS with that not being I mean, those may be the kinds of choices that we may be picking. So I think that the chaos that, don't really want to call that down on our heads, but if there is chaos, and I can imagine that Ms. Stone is correct that people who have signed up for full-day kindergarten now find that there's some bill due for what they've signed up for based on no expectation of a cost. That's going to lead to some issues. I think that in the position we are in, we need to consider that further income is necessary for further services to be provided. And in the absence of that income, we will have to do the cuts. And I believe that the cuts that have been outlined by the administration are ones that, as unpalatable as they are are ones that we're going to have to stomach.
Ms. Cox? Sorry, Ms. Cox.
I want to agree with Ms. Stone that it's been terrific to receive all the letters over the last week with appreciations of ECS. I have a very long history with ECS in Brookline. It goes back to the 1970s in the devotion school where we had a gifted and talented program at that time. Bunny Myers was the teacher. And I recall wonderful experiences there with individualized projects and conferences where we were brought to meet with local resources, not unlike the one we had speaking tonight, where students could engage and learn more about those areas of expertise and talk about current events. So I was delighted when I came back to Brookline and found that there was still a program. It had changed its name, Enrichment Challenge Support, and it had changed its model and was reaching many more kids. And I have my children have certainly been beneficiaries of that program, and so to look into the realities of this budget has been a very painful process for me, as I know it has been for many of you as well. But it is a reality sitting on this side of the table that we can't have what we can't pay for. And so these ideas that have come before us of possible ways that we could restore ECS and some of the other cuts, neither of them is, as Mr. Warren says, particularly palatable. I find one more palatable, I guess, than the other. I'm very reluctant, I have deep misgivings about the idea of charging for full-day kindergarten. That was another innovation since I came. I was a half-day kindergartner, but I was delighted to find that Brookline was a pioneer in leading on understanding the importance of early childhood education, that it has a high return on investment. I worry that if we were to charge for full-day kindergarten, aside from the logistics, we won't have everyone enroll, no matter how low the cost or how much we scholarship. There will still be people who will opt for half-day options, and those children will lose out on some of the benefits that they could have. And I also wonder about fracturing within school communities when you offer two options of kindergarten classrooms. Having done PTO work, I know that kindergarten is an especially important year for building community and building commitment to a school and bringing people together. The issue of fundraising for batteries. We'll take them. I think there are certainly issues around about the second idea about trying to find private funds, but I would be interested in exploring what would be the potentials there before I would want to look at the kindergarten option.
If I may, there actually is one more thing that I would like to speak to that I thought would be raised in this meeting, but I haven't heard yet, which is the way that cuts are made, especially regarding the OFC cut and Winthrop House cut, which I know have been scaled back. But my understanding from talking with a lot of teachers at the high school who were very upset and were complaining openly in the high school about the way that this was dealt with was that these cuts weren't made with the cooperation or input of the teachers. And a lot of teachers were really upset about that. And of course they were also upset about the loss of these program heads, but I think there were also a lot of people really frustrated at the way that this decision was made. And it wasn't made with the cooperation of the teachers, at least from my understanding of having talked with teachers. And so I think that that's something that we have to look at going forward, that when we're making cuts, obviously there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be upset or not going to be unhappy with the cuts, but that everybody is involved and at least their input is gotten before cuts are made. Thanks.
No, Ms. Chalupsky, you go ahead. Okay. I have one here.
I have one too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the microphones are sending us a message. So like everyone else, I appreciate the level of detail, Mr. Rowe, that's gone into this presentation. Bill, Jennifer, everyone, the principals. I actually think that there has been a tremendous amount of collaboration. There might be places, obviously, where it didn't work the way people hoped, but there's been a tremendous amount of system-wide teacher, coordinator, principal-led input. And I think everyone who's been through these mind-numbing charts understands that Peter sweats every $5,000 in an $85 million budget, and I think we all appreciate that on the town's behalf. And I think one of the things that's come up a few times is that, although not much, is sort of how much there is to be proud of in this budget. And I think it's worth saying because I'll get to the bad stuff in a minute, but just to give one moment. I mean, there's a lot of positive vision in the budget also. I think, we all have aspirations, and we all are in many ways a highly performing system. I think in the strategic plan process that we've been going through, there's a lot of discussion about rigor and about academic excellence and about equity and about technology and about all kinds of new innovations that are happening in education that our teachers and principals and staff and parents are all pretty excited about. And I do think, Sam, to your point, I think there are a lot of commitments that we've kept to in here. So there has never been, at least in my knowledge, a serious conversation at the school committee level about cutting METCO. We've never had a serious conversation about reducing services to English language learners. We've never had a serious conversation about cutting special education services, even despite the fact that revenues are getting cut. So I think there's a tremendous steps to success. We're increasing technology access for people who can't access this is increasing. So I think there are a lot of things in this budget that we should be proud of, and Bill has led that, and his team and the principals have led that. At the same time, right, there is this concern, and I've expressed it a few times, about what I call the chipping away of that excellence. And I think that over the last 5 years, as our enrollment has grown and our ratios have stayed the same, we've been talking about this for nonstop. Sometimes the public just tunes in for different pieces, but if we were to look at the ratios of guidance counselors and nurses and all of the support staff to our students, those ratios have been going down. ECS is one of them. It's been going down as a ratio. And so I do think that this chipping away, that systems are not changed in a day, but they are changed over time, and that chipping away matters a lot. And they are at low levels. So the other thing that I would say is that my read of the last few weeks of parent and community input is that it has been incredibly rich. I would say that I certainly have never seen crowds of 60, 70 people at 4 parent forums in a row that are all, Devo, Driscoll, Devotion, Driscoll, Lawrence this morning I was crowding, and it was taking over the library, metastasizing, and Pierce, I heard, was as well. The strategic plan forum that we had, people wanted, and it's, I would say, running 80+% ECS. We've gotten over 100 letters, or at least I have. I think most of us have. I've fielded dozens of phone calls, probably because I have small children, and I can't walk through the halls in the morning and the afternoon. And so I think that the outpouring has been not just about the ECS program, but if you read across all the letters, it really is about rigor. And about, if it were just about a couple kids getting pulled out, we just wouldn't see these numbers, right? And so I think there is something about, what I've heard is that please don't take this away. Even this isn't enough, whatever this is. It's good, it's not enough, and please don't take it away, because without it we'd be lost. And so I do think that it plays into a larger conversation that we have been having about what does challenge look like for the top 25% of learners, for top 30% of learners? What does it mean as a model, or to take seriously some of the new ideas in pedagogy of every child being challenged at their level? meaning every child's level is known, and that's a very difficult thing to do as a system, that levels are more than just skills, that their levels are non-cognitive, they are social, emotional. Not every, there's no such, I mean, I don't believe in the concept of gifted, because frankly, I think children have gifts across cognitive, non-cognitive, and social emotional spectrums, and I think they spike in different areas. And so anyway, but sort of a bit of a tangent. But anyway, I do think that a lot of the new models around personalized learning, which are not technology replacing teachers, but it's technology enabled pedagogy, which is a really big difference. Technology as an enabler to pedagogy is very different from, let's just give everyone iPads and then we can have class sizes of 60. And I think sometimes the technology word gets a little confused, but there are models of personalized learning in School of One and whatnot that do really successfully challenge kids at all levels. And I'm persuaded that every child being challenged at their level is not the end. It's a means to an end of achievement, but it is something that the rest of the country is talking seriously about. And to be, just kind of come back to Ben's point and others, like we don't have the money to do it. I mean, we don't have the money in budgets like this to be the district that we want to be, to have the ratios we want to have, to do the cool things that our educators are telling us that they want to be able to do. So while it's not just about ECS, it's about, I think that what I've been reading in the letters is that it's about a range of things. It is also about ECS and what we lose by not maintaining some kernel as we look for bridges to somewhere. Not bridges to nowhere. No one wants a bridge to nowhere. But as we look for bridges to somewhere, what do we lose? And I'm asking the question of what would it look like to not have a bridge, and what would it look like to try to restore, reimagine something that was gone, and what would happen to the kids in the meantime? And I guess I'm not as convinced as others that we can do nothing about this in the meantime. So that's my thoughts for now. I'm hoping we can. I have a couple ideas on creative solutions, but other people want to talk first, so I don't want to.
Are there other people who wish to talk? Ms. Cholupsky?
But maybe you want to talk about your creative solutions first. You know, it's interesting. I'm sitting and listening and thinking back to when I first came on the school committee, and I probably bore all of you with this, but the first time I was on the school committee, we had to cut $4 million out of the budget. That was in 1994, many years ago. And at the time, we cut very valued programs. We cut home ec for the elementary schools. We cut the wood shop. Most of you guys don't even know it existed at one time in Brookline. We cut performing arts in the 4th grade. We had to slash. And after that, we had an override. Music. An operation, music, yeah. Yeah, no, performing, I meant instrumental music, excuse me. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do. I mean, it was just awful, and we had an override after that. And there was a reason that we had that. I respectfully disagree that we have to wait 2 years to do that at this point. But in the meantime, we do need to balance this budget. And my concern, the other piece that I was very involved with 13 years ago, was getting full-day kindergarten, and the reasons behind why we got full-day kindergarten. There were educational reasons for full-day kindergarten, and I think by charging for full-day kindergarten, it's very regressive and not educationally sound. There will be children who won't go. There will be parents who will be embarrassed to say they can't afford it, and so they'll say, I'm not going to send my kid. There will be classes that go into 1st grade at different levels, because those kids who go to kindergarten get one education, those who don't will get another. I don't think this is Brookline. And for me, to charge parents for something that we feel is an important equity issue, an important educational issue, is just the wrong thing to do. It's a slippery slope. Some people say it'll be a year. How do we know it'll be a year? Next year there'll be other cuts. You know, I don't think it's the right move at all. I do value ECS. I think it is an important program. I think if we're going to do something for a year, let's take it out of our one-time reserves. We said we'd want to be less reliant on one-time reserves. If we don't have them, we won't be reliant on them. You know, it's as simple as that. But, you know, I mean, if we're looking for a place to take them out of. The other piece that I think we're forgetting too is, if I'm not mistaken, we also lose some state aid if we charge for kindergarten. We don't get half the amount?
It depends on the amount.
Not the grant. I'm talking about the per pupil Chapter 70 funding.
Does happen in the year? I thought it was a year in arrears.
Well, but so we will get it at one point or another.
Yeah, the new formula does incorporate a factor for kindergarten, and that wouldn't be allowed if you're charging for full-day kindergarten. The numbers would be small, I believe, but yes, it's a new factor. Remember, Chapter 70 is not exclusively or primarily dependent on enrollment, but it's affected by it. So, to your point, yes.
I guess just to sum up, I think it's against our fundamental values of what I at least understand the Brookline school system to be in terms of what we believe children should have, and to go backwards when we've come so far with it and been, you know, out in front of most communities in terms of having full-day kindergarten, I think would be the wrong move.
Ms. Kershaw.
I don't have that much to add. I like to associate myself with a lot of the comments, what Sam said, what Dr. Warren said, and what Mr. Chang said at the beginning too, that we're, you know, Dr. Lupini said today, we're out of tricks. We've been at it to deal with this enrollment without commensurate revenue increases for 5 years, and we're out of tricks. And so we're looking at some terrible cuts. So I just want to say a couple of things. The first is I want to recognize that the way this budget was put together, and I said it at our last meeting, I want to say it again, was a creative and brave way to do it. I spent a lot of time at the state level with very difficult budget decisions, and the easiest thing to do is hunker down, keep what you have, and cut everything the same. And that is not what we did. We looked over every piece of it. We tried to figure out where we had to continue to make innovations and protect special education at the high school and those less fortunate, and to continue to make commitments to social emotional learning through Alveus curriculum, and continue to try and leapfrog out of the dark ages in technology, and try and keep our district moving forward in some ways. So I want to say that I think, and we're paying for that because we also had to make some really difficult cuts. And the other thing I want to say is it has been amazing to get all the parent letters about ECS. We don't hear from parents. We never have an audience here. And it's not that I want an audience, but we are elected representatives, and to hear from those in the community who are affected by what we're trying to do up here is so important. And the letters were so thoughtful and very personal about how the program is touching your children every day, and how they were bored without it, and the sparkle. So this is an incredibly difficult process, and none of us like the choices that are in front of us. So I don't, again, have that much to add to the other things that you've all said, except that, you know, I think it's important that we continue to have this discussion, that we've introduced some of these ideas to the community. I think it's good we've shared some of the pain we've been going through about why we would ever think of putting ECS and eliminating ECS. And I think you can tell from some of the comments that it was only after finding no other way to go. So I think we should continue this discussion. I think we should engage the community in the true options, of which there are so limited. and try and come out the other side with the best we can do for this year while we try and create a longer-term plan that can really give us the kind of resources we need to be the district we want to be and to meet the needs of all of our learners. So, and I know that this budget might not do that this year, but hopefully it'll position us to be able to do it better in the future.
Thank you, Ms. Kershaw. I'll just add that I also am impressed by the letters that we've received. I'll add that I'm impressed by on the one hand, the passion, and on the other hand, the respectfulness with which they were delivered. That I think was very important, I suspect, to all of us, both the school committee and the staff. And not to hide by my chairmanship, but I'll just make a short comment that my own inclination, based on what we're faced with, is to take a hard look at revenue rather than a hard look on cuts. It's going to be unpleasant no matter what we do. Mr. Goff, did you have?
Yes, I won't make the joke again about our budget cuts. Exactly, right. It's like the Gong Show. So clearly no short-term, magic fairy will show up with lots of money, unless they will, which would be great. But I guess this may be a question more for Amy than anything else, or Bill. But I guess I do appreciate that Peter sweats every $5,000 in an $85 million budget, because we see it in single point font in 16-page budget messages with no margins and tiny print. But I guess what I'm just wondering is, given that none of these revenue scenarios is particularly palatable, I'm just wondering if there's some way to think about combining them that we should talk about in finance that would, I don't know, pull another rabbit out of an empty bag. Because I guess what I appreciate about this process is that it really has been one where it hasn't been one set of parents against another set of parents, or my kids and not your kids. And and what I like about the way this has happened, again, not that there's a lot to like, but that at least we're sort of trying to address this as a community and pull together as a community. So I'm just wondering if there's some way to have a conversation at finance or something where we see if there's one more rabbit. I'll give you the microphone.
Well, just to reiterate, I mean, I think we have a meeting on April 1st. I think it would be good to have. What's the April Fool's Day? Great. Which would be following the budget hearing, and so I think. Absolutely, we can have a discussion prior, and we can continue to think about it, and we may land in the same position that we are by the time we take a vote on this budget. But at least we'll have the benefit of the full public budget hearing. I would just want to know how we might communicate the various options, choices, and trade-offs that have been discussed, because although we have a large crowd here relative to our usual crowd, it's not necessarily reflective of the full district or the town or the community. And so in order for us to really evaluate, I guess I'm wondering how we might determine sort of where the public might be. Bill, I don't know if you, or sure.
Before we get into the idea of trying to get information out, I actually was curious about what that information would be. So this idea of cutting I mean, there have been a lot of very painful revenue-raising options laid out here, and each one of them has significant drawbacks, as has been extremely well articulated. So the question is, if there is a rabbit in this hat, it's a bundle that's made up of something, and I'm just curious, Ms. Ditkoff, whether in suggesting that you actually had more detail about what that bundle could look like, because I'm not sure how I mean, looking at these options and the ones that have been on the table, it's not clear to me how you carve that up.
So let me try.
Oh,
so thank you.
Thank you,
so,
Dr.
so first of all, let me say that I think we're going to have to talk about the timeline because April 1st is too late. I think if you're talking about implementing these two options or pieces of these options, right? April 1st is too late. In fact, I said at Finance on Monday when we discussed these two ideas that I thought a decision needed to be made by March 21st in order to utilize an option around parents putting together some sum of money toward program, or in terms of notifying people that we were going to charge. We're late now to do some of that, so I thought it needed to be done in that timeline. So I think whatever we do, and I have a sort of a package, if you will, I think it was referred to as that you could consider, but I think the way to do this, if it was of any interest to the committee, would be to ask us to go back and put together some of the detail for next week to get that out to the community. We have lots of ways of doing that as to what that might be in terms of the detail sooner rather than later, even prior to the 21st. That would be my take on it. Because if you're going to have a public hearing and people are going to come and tell you not to cut ECS, you've already said you're looking for options not to do that. So let's talk about the option instead of what we know we don't want to do. So what I've tried to do here is draw from a number of the various pieces of this and even a piece of the reserve idea, and have at least had some conversation with senior staff about this, and it really entails pieces of a number of these proposals. So it includes what is listed here as number one. The school committee would need to waive their policy in a limited fashion to allow for some type of community contribution. I've set that because I don't believe there's any way to set a false expectation that it's $200,000 or whatever it may be, but I've set that at $50,000. Which would allow us to implement part of an ECS model. And when I go through the whole thing, I'll talk about that $50,000 a little bit more. But it would require everything that's listed here in terms of the conditions, and we'd have to spell that out and put a deadline date because we'd have to have a date certain that we knew we had that funding available, or we wouldn't be able to restore that part of the program. We've talked about in terms of this discussion 6-point plan, as I can keep calling it today, some type of charge for the full-day kindergarten program, a smaller charge. The state grant allows you to charge up to $4,000. There are districts that do that. I'm suggesting here a charge of $1,000, but I'm suggesting that we get that out and the conditions around that out soon. I think shortly thereafter next week's meeting in order to make that even viable. I'm suggesting that we could take another $50,000 from reserves. That would, depending on what the value of that full-day kindergarten piece is, it puts you at some number from which you could restore the $200,000 ECS proposal in the alternative, which is to be developed by the program review team. I think that needs to become the $150,000 if the $50,000 from the community isn't raised. So we specified a $150,000 plan, a $200,000 plan. Quite frankly, I think that's dependent on whether that prong number one can be carried off or not. I think the other piece we've addressed here that we've not talked about, except in the addendum tonight, is the high school staff cut. I've reduced that by 1 FTE. I think 2 is a much more realistic number than 3.0 in that. And I still believe that in that restoration package, if there's money remaining, and I believe there would be in this restoration package, that it needs to go toward jumpstarting our technology initiatives. That's a 6-point plan that the senior staff can get behind.
Bill, you're suggesting a way to finance more than just a single restoration. You're looking at a broader spectrum of what it would take to do a lot of your restoration list. Is that right?
A lot of 2 items, ECS and the technology piece. And I've added in that high school piece because of a change in the conditions.
And I'm a little bit confused about why we can debate whether or not we'd even need to. I actually don't believe we would need to suspend any of our policies in order to enable a grant from the Boston, from the Brookline.
That may be true.
From the Community Foundation, we have long-standing relationships that allow those sorts of things. The question I have is, I know that you've heard a lot at parent forums that there is interest in the community about being able to contribute. So
right.
I've just wondered why you're saying 50,000. If the community does a fundraising effort and comes up with 100,000,
that's great. Well, but these dates would not intersect well.
And you're talking, as you said in your original presentation, that this is bridge funding.
Both the kindergarten and the community fundraising piece are bridge funding.
So what you're suggesting we should be talking about is a 1-year only implementation of any of
both of those are under the conditions as spelled out here. Yes, they're bridge funding.
Well,
okay,
this is kind of interesting. Okay,
so
I think that we have something additional to discuss, which we didn't have when we came in here.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
About the community contribution. I mean, it just strikes me that the community would have to raise these funds in a fairly short amount of time. It just strikes me that, I don't know if you've done any thinking on that or maybe we need to talk about this in a week, but just how short, right? Like when would we have to know? Because I can imagine.
We haven't got, so.
We don't know yet. That's
so
okay.
what we need to do off of tonight is know from you if this 6-point plan is of interest, and then we have to fill in those details. And that's why I'm at March 21st, because let me guess for a second that it's mid-May. Okay? Quite frankly, if we lay out the conditions, I have some work to do to talk to potential partners. One of them could be the community fund, about whether they'd be willing to be the sort of the receptacle of these funds, right? All those kinds of things that would have to be done in a week in order to provide you and the community with detail as to what we'd want to hear from them on in a week. That's a lot of work on 6 different prongs. That's a lot of work. We can do it, and we'll do it in order to try to bring additional revenue to the table and spell this out if this is at all interesting to the group of you.
Mr. Chang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think one of the things I want to emphasize, and Bill and Peter, you guys obviously knows this, is that the 2 options are not palatable. They're not great, but one is controllable. We have high certainty. The other one, we have very low certainty. In a very short period of time, we cannot control. So that is why I'm saying that we need to have both options on the table. Otherwise, we are fooling ourselves.
So here's what I'd like to do. I think that people have to tell me if there's anyone who is unalterably opposed to exploring these ideas which Dr. Lupini has brought forward. And if not, then I think we don't know what the details are, because Dr. Lupini is just kind of bringing this forward, and he hasn't had a chance to explore the details, so we shouldn't ask him questions now. But
Well, but it is fair that this should be soon, and I want to emphasize the point around the communication with the community. I think we need to do some of this in short order, at least get these, what the 6-point plan would be out, right? So again, if you're interested, we need to get it out to people. We need to say that it's one potential option for next week. You could hear some testimony on it as part of the hearing, because it does solve problems in this budget.
Which creates other problems.
And creates other problems. And creates other problems.
That's exactly right.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
And
and then we'd be providing detail like dates,
Got it.
those kinds of things next a week from tonight.
Dr. Warren.
I also think you need to discuss what would be the option, what would occur in the if you fail, or if you get to 60% of the funds necessary to
Right. So so as we started to develop a budget off of this, obviously the ones that we think we have some more control over, we'd set lower. And we I've given you one piece of thinking about the fundraising piece, which would be, we have a couple different plans depending on what that amount of money might be. We'd have to think that through a little bit more, though.
Ms. Kershaw, and then I'm going to make a kind of a wrap-up
I'll be
suggestion.
brief, sorry. I want to say just personally that charging for kindergarten, I think, should not be on the table, because there are more than 2 decades of research about the benefits of early childhood education. It is an evidence-based intervention for all children that leads to greater school success and long-term increases in salary, benefits in terms of graduation from high school and college and achievement. Having said that, and I think sending a message that it's optional by having a part day and charging for it is, it's not Brookline also, or not the pioneers that we want to be around education. Having said that, I also think we're elected officials, and so I would feel comfortable not putting it out as a 6-point plan, but as alternatives being explored to address current budget cuts, so that there's an opportunity for people to, and we know from the letters we've received that people are thoughtful and they understand how difficult the situation is. I just wouldn't want it to be perceived as a plan that we've put out, but more like, okay, so we have this option, very unpalatable, or this very unpalatable one, or this one. And that would be very important for us to get that feedback in that regard. Sorry.
Right on the money. I'm just going to try and wrap it up.
Well, you asked for if somebody was unalterably opposed, so I wanted to answer your question.
Opposed to talking about the overall plan that Dr.
Well,
Lupini?
I'd like to talk about one piece of it that I'm opposed to, if that's okay.
Sure.
I am opposed to charging for full-day kindergarten. I think that we're taking 600 parents and basically balancing our budget on their backs, and I don't think that's fair. I really don't. I think that we have a problem that's not their problem. It's not the ECS problem. It's a problem that's structural here. We have an increase of students, and our increase of funds haven't kept up with that. And I don't think it's the right thing to do.
That's okay. So, go ahead.
I just want to say one thing, which I think I'm the only person at the table who would actually be affected by this, because I'm the only person that has a child below kindergarten age. But I do agree with what Amy said about it needing to be an option. We are looking at options. No one's saying it's a good one, but it's an option. And I think we need to have that discussion as a community.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to agree with the first part for now. I'll get around to my comments on the second part in a second. So I want to absolutely agree with that, and I don't want this to come across to anyone that I believe a district should charge for full-day kindergarten. As I said at the Finance Committee meeting last week, I'm the only person I believe in the room who's ever implemented a program where full-day kindergarten was charged for in my previous district, and I can cite the issues with it, which only begin with what you laid out, right? But I'm listening to a school committee and trying to propose solutions to help them solve a problem. That's my job, right? And so we'll do that. I will say the one part I worry about as we just continue into late March and early May talking about options is that, A, as I said earlier, we begin to take options off the table just by the fact that we're talking about them and not deciding to do them. And now we have 450, now we have 500, we have more and more people. And if we decide to implement something, they're under a different set of conditions. And second of all, there are lots of other pieces of this budget that we have to start implementing. Normally, at this point, and we will be doing this with some things, there are things in this budget that we've not spent a lot of time on that we're going to actually start implementing. We have to. We have to start, for example, for the clerk, the collections clerk, and the organization of that change in register. We're going to start doing that. We have to. Because if we don't, it won't happen. And we'll do this work, but it takes, but I just want an understanding on the part of the committee that there are a limited number of us. And it takes away from, it takes away from our day jobs. It takes away from the other part of the responsibilities that we have to principals and teachers and kids. Right? And so we'll do it. And a lot of people will have to clear the decks on a lot of their schedule over the next week in order to put some of these things together and get them out to the community and do that work for Thursday night so that we have options on the table for you.
Although I do, now that I actually have a microphone in front of me, want to associate myself with the wisdom behind Ms. Kershaw's remarks about not putting a package out to the community. I think that these are a series of options, and as we've all said, they have serious drawbacks, each one of them. What we need to know is from the community which ones of them have any support, if any of them have support. And I am very sensitive to what Helen raised, which is that my concern is that on the kindergarten option, that it's going to be much easier for people in the schools already, or looking at being in the schools a year from now, to say, yeah, absolutely, charge for next year's kindergarten. We're probably not going to hear a lot at the public hearing from the people who are entering kindergarten next year, but maybe we will. But I think it's important to bear in mind that that the easiest solution in here is a solution that kicks the burden to people who are unlikely to come talk to us about it. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I don't find that to be an easy solution. Just because I don't hear from people at a podium, I don't find that to be an easy solution.
No, I don't either. But but it can't be the only thing we use.
No, I understand.
If there's robust supports for it. So with that.
Ms. Scotto.
I agree with much of what you said, Ms. Kershaw, about the value of early education. I think we make a statement when we don't support early education. We also make a statement when we don't support ECS. There's ample research for the value of both of those things. And I think it's hard for me to make the choice one way or the other, and I think we have to explore both.
Thank you. And so what we have is a series of questions, a broader series of questions that we wish to explore with the community at a public hearing, and then interpret that however we want, including, I don't think there's anybody here who disagrees with Ms. Kershaw's or Ms. Shalupsky's description of the value of early education. So it's just a question of unattractive alternatives, but we're going to have to address them. So I'd like to thank everybody for a rich discussion. I would like to thank everybody in the audience, most of you who have stayed for an incredibly long time and have been very tolerant. And I thank you, and both for the public that's here and the other people who've provided us with input. It's been helpful. And I would like to now see if we can complete this this meeting. We do have a need for an executive session, and we want to discuss strategy with regard to litigation if an open meeting might have a detrimental effect on the litigation position of the public body. And so I declare that we need to do this. And yes, and Ms. Coyne, if you would do the roll call.